They believed it would be simple to threaten a single mother. They were unaware that they were facing one of the most lethal K-9 handlers in the military when the Shadow Reapers MC targeted Staff Sergeant Natalie Grant's family. Their intimidation attempt would result in an unparalleled manhunt in the sleepy Virginian community of Riverbend, where the hunters would turn into the hunted. One of the most deadly motorcycle clubs on the East Coast was about to learn a harsh lesson about choosing the wrong target from 2 military canines, 15 years of war tracking knowledge, and a mother's perseverance. Tell us where you're tuning in from before we resume. Additionally, if this tale resonates with you, please make sure to subscribe, as I have something very special in store for you tomorrow. As Natalie Grant walked her dogs through their morning ritual, the morning frost was still sticking to the grass. With smooth precision, Rex, a Belgian Malinois with combat scars concealed under his fur, navigated the obstacle course. Despite his advanced age, Shadow, a German shepherd with a dark coat that had hints of gray around his snout, stood vigil from his perch. As a result of 3 tours in Afghanistan and countless hours of training, Nat's trained eye captured every detail of Rex's movements, including his ability to anticipate commands before she gave them. After leaving the service, she constructed a K-9 training facility that was more than simply a company. It was a monument to what she had learned about tracking valuable targets through some of the most hazardous areas on Earth. With a voice that carried the quiet authority that had led her military working dog teams through innumerable missions, she ordered them to hold position. Rex froze, waiting, stiff muscles. As 12-year-old Emma finished her breakfast and got ready for school, she watched from the veranda of their home next to the training yard. "Can I assist with training after school, Mom?" With a voice full of her inherited passion for working with the dogs, Emma shouted out. Nat was about to reply with a smile when Rex and Shadow's ears pricked up at the same time. She paused at their response, her 15 years of service-honed instincts taking over. Too deep for a regular issue, the kind of custom work preferred by some groups, a motorcycle's rumbling approached. Inside Emma, Nat remarked coolly, looking around the perimeter in her easygoing manner. "You'll arrive at school late." The Shadow Reaper's MC's characteristic leather cut was worn by the rider of the motorcycle that emerged at the end of their lengthy driveway. Although Nat had observed their increasing presence in Riverbend during the previous month, they had never before approached her land so closely. The rider slowed, looking around the facilities too intently to be a casual observer. Because of their training, Rex and Shadow were able to stay in their positions and follow the possible threat while remaining motionless. A patch identifying the rider as Shade, the Shadow Reaper's intelligence collector, was attached to his cut. Nat knew him from the briefings Detective Connor had given her the previous week, in which he warned of the MC's plans to expand into Riverbend. "Beautiful dogs," Shade exclaimed, his tone belying his genuine kindness. "Do you want to train them yourself?" Nat said calmly, "I do," without indicating that she knew who he was or that she comprehended the threat he was posing. "Today, my facility is closed to visitors." Emma flinched a little on the porch as Shade revved his engine. "Shame, King is willing to spend top price for high-quality training and has been trying to add additional protection to our company." Nat remained casual, but her thoughts were already making a list of specifics. His eyes were constantly sweeping over the layout of the facility. The radio mic was partially visible at his collar, and the bulge beneath his cut suggested a concealed weapon. She replied, placing her hand close to Rex's head, "I'm pretty selective about my clients. Please provide the police department your number, they take care of my background checks." Shade's amiable manner faltered a little. "Background checks might be risky here, especially for single mothers, careful lady." The morning air was heavy with the threat. Nat could sense the tension between Rex and Shadow, their knowledge of the changing dynamics, even though they stayed still. They had experienced too many combat scenarios to fail to see the warning signs of impending bloodshed. "That sounds a lot like a threat," Nat remarked, her tone adopting the abrasiveness that had earned her respect in combat zones. "You may want to reconsider that strategy." Shade's smile froze as he simply relayed the worries of merchants that cared about the town. I hate to see such a lovely setup go to waste. He glanced at the folks operating it or at Emma on the porch. Rex and Shadow turned their full focus to Shade as Nat made a single step forward. Although the dogs didn't make noise, their intense attentiveness spoke a lot. For a split second, Shade lost his cool as he noticed something in their demeanor that defied civilian training. "Let me clarify," Nat said softly. "Before threatening me, your community-minded businesspeople might want to do some research. I learned a lot about handling threats during my 15 years with military police canine teams." Shade warned, "You're making a mistake," but his voice suddenly included a hint of doubt. "King has a hard time accepting rejection." "Neither do I," said Nat. "I also have 2 war-trained canines who can track a target through anything, unlike King. Before you decide to escalate this debate, keep that in mind." Shade spun his bike around and sped up his motor, spraying gravel. "We will be in contact with you once more." Nat responded, "I'm looking forward to it," as she watched him drive away. When he was gone, she looked at Emma, who had a determined and scared expression on her face. "Plans have changed, honey. We're dropping you off early today at school." "I mean, they won't abandon us, will they?" Despite her worry, Emma asked in a firm voice. "No," Nat said, already bracing herself for the moment. "However, they will soon discover why it is quite unwise to harm the family of a military dog handler." Detective Connor texted Nat while she was gathering Emma's school supplies. "Tonight, Shadow Reapers are transporting merchandise across the town. Getting together at the typical location?" Nat said simply, "Yes," and then she crouched down next to Rex and Shadow. "Boys, it appears that retirement is over. We need to get to work." Now that the morning sun had fully risen, the training yard was covered in lengthy shadows as the frost was burned away. The Shadow Reapers MC had just initiated what they believed to be a straightforward game of intimidation. They were unaware that they had just begun a losing battle against a rival who had dedicated her professional life to pursuing more risky targets than they did. Nat Grant was going to demonstrate to them why it is improper to threaten the family of a dog trainer. The neon sign for the Lucky Cup Diner flickered in the late morning sunlight as it sat on the edge of Riverbend. With her back to the wall and a clear view of both entrances, Nat carefully selected her seat. Old habits did not die easily. At her feet, Rex and Shadow appeared at ease, but their eyes were watching everything through the window. On time, Detective Logan Connor entered the booth carrying a manila folder that was thick enough to be a concern. The weight of someone who hadn't slept well in a while was evident on his face. "Did they get in touch?" Although it seemed from his expression that he already knew the answer, he inquired. Nat verified this morning as she saw a motorcycle pass the diner for the 3rd time. When Shade visited the institution, he initially attempted to be amicable before making threats. Connor spread pictures on the table as he opened the folder. Shade was among the Shadow Reapers members Nat recognized, but her focus was drawn to their leader. The man in Victor King Haynes's picture had the icy calculation of someone who liked to hurt others in his eyes. Connor said, "They're not just another MC searching for territory. For months, the DEA has been after them. They have ties to international cartels and operate in 3 states. Their new distribution center is located in Riverbend." Nat looked at the surveillance images, noting patrol patterns and defense positions. At least some of them have military training. The way Shade moves and secures areas is not a street strategy. Connor confirmed that it was X-Force Recon. King and those close to him. "We are unable to come close because of this. Before we can collect any evidence, they identify surveillance teams." Nat's face lit up with a ghost of a smile. Instead of canine units trained to track valuable targets, they are searching for human surveillance. Connor bent over. "These aren't Afghan insurgents, Nat. They have connections and resources. 2 of my cops have already been bought off by them." Nat answered, "And they threatened my daughter," with a sharp edge that caused both dogs to raise their heads. Logan, they went too far. They now have to cope with the fallout. The detective produced other images that displayed warehouse locations and shipping manifests. Tonight, they have a significant move to make. Lots of cars and strict security. Whatever it is, King should personally supervise it since it is significant enough. Years of military preparation were already beginning to play out in Nat's imagination as she considered various scenarios. A staging place, a location with several escape routes, and adequate visibility are all necessary. Connor pushed another picture across the table and suggested the old lumber mill. There has been more action there in the last week, according to satellite. Nat examined the picture, noting elements of the topography and access points. It's also the ideal location for an ambush. If someone was aware of what to search for. Nat looked up at Connor's stern tone. You can't confront them directly. They have guns and numbers. They're predictable, she clarified. Military training comprises military procedures, patterns, and thought processes. Let me spend 6 hours at that mill with Rex and Shadow. I will explain to you how they are conducting their business. This time, a motorbike engine blasted past the diner with more volume. Nat saw one of King's enforcers, Fawn, through the glass, not trying to conceal his monitoring. Now they're observing us, Connor said softly. Good, Nat said as she drained her coffee. Let them observe. They will soon discover the distinction between seeing and observing. Nat took a position in the woods with a view of the timber mill as evening drew near. Beside her, Rex and Shadow moved in silence, their training enabling them to travel around the area soundlessly. Nat's focus was on the thermal imaging device she had saved from her service days, despite the harsh shadows created by the facility's floodlights on the deserted yard. The perimeter was monitored by 3 guards, whose movements supported Connor's suspicions regarding their military training. They were professional in their radio discipline and overlapping areas of fire. Professionals, however, too have flaws. One could anticipate patterns. Protocols might be taken advantage of. With a scarcely audible instruction, she said to Rex, track. Scents that would be imperceptible to human senses were picked up by the Malinois keen nose. Shadow kept rear security, his ears always on the move, listening for anything in the distance. At precisely 22 hours, a black SUV with diplomatic license plates was the first car to arrive, followed by 2 motorcyclists. Silently, Nat's camera recorded faces, plates, and other things that could come in handy later. Then she caught sight of him. Even from this distance, Victor King Haynes's dominating presence was evident as he stepped out of the SUV. He walked with the vigilance of one accustomed to violence, looking around him all the time. Nat's jaw tightened as more cars pulled up and a shipping container was opened to show its contents. Not only weapons, narcotics, or military-grade equipment that shouldn't be on American streets. Nat sensed Shadow tighten next to her, and Rex's nose twitched. Someone was coming at them. She trusted her dog's senses and stayed motionless. One of the perimeter guards was scouring the woods when a twig broke 15 meters to their left. As the guard came within meters of their position, Nat held her breath. Because of their training, which made them invisible in the dark, Rex and Shadow stayed still. Spector's voice crackled on the guard's radio. We have company in town, therefore King wants the shipment relocated before midnight. The guard went by without realizing how nearly he had found them. Nat kept her voice barely above a whisper and waited until he was gone before turning up the radio. You copy, Connor. Proceed. The DEA is someone you should call. These days, it's not only narcotics, they're also transporting military technology and weapons. They are receiving secret equipment from someone. After sending the pictures, she took a seat to keep an eye on things. Not only had the Shadow Reapers improved the game, but they had also committed a critical error. They were using their military training to think like soldiers. However, Nat had been trained to track soldiers, hunt them, and learn how they thought and move. Now, she had evidence of what they were actually doing in Riverbend. She felt a cold certainty descend upon her as she watched King leading the operation below. Although the Shadow Reapers believed they were ready for anything, they were unprepared for a mother who had received military training and 2 dogs that were experts at hunting valuable targets. The actual search was about to start, and Nat wasn't only pursuing rebels across unfamiliar mountains this time. She was defending her community, her daughter, and her home, and she was going to show these former military thugs why K-9 units were the most feared trackers in the military. It took us a long time to prepare and tell this story, so please subscribe to our channel if you find it entertaining. It means a lot to us. Let's return to the narrative. During morning training, the call was received. Nat's phone buzzed with Dr. Grayson's number as she and Rex were working on sophisticated smell tracking. Before she could respond, her gut grew tense. "Grant, Mrs. The strain in the principal's voice was not well hidden. We are in a predicament. Outside the school, 2 males are parked on motorcycles. They're requesting Emma." Nat was already on her way, beckoning the 2 canines to her car. "I'll be gone in 3 minutes. Shut down the school. Nobody approaches my daughter." Grayson told her it was already done. "However, Mrs. Grant, they have cuts from the Shadow Reapers. On roads intended for 40, Nat's truck reached 60. In the rear, Rex and Shadow braced. She saw motorbikes crashing in behind her in her rearview mirror. Just keeping a safe distance, not attempting to catch up. Causing her pain. The school appeared. There are 2 motorcycles parked near the front door. King's main enforcers, Grim and Thunder, leaned casually and deliberately against their bikes. Students looked through the windows of the classroom, watching the action develop with their faces pressed against the window. Nat parked just in front of the school door and the bikes. Without orders, Rex and Shadow took up flanking positions as she left. Thunder's hand twitched toward his jacket as he straightened slightly at the sight of the dog. Nat's voice carried over the parking lot as she said, "Cute setup, making a point with children. Very courageous." Grim answered, his scarred visage contorting into what might have been a smile, simply conveying a message. "King wants to discuss business. This time, a proper discussion. So he sends thugs to the school where my daughter goes." Nat moved ahead a step. Because they had been trained for years, both dogs moved in unison with her. A poor tactical choice. There was no humor in Thunder's laugh. "You don't want this conflict, lady. King's reach is unimaginable. Your military pension vanishes once he calls. Your loans are called in, and mishaps occur." Nat took another step and acknowledged, "You're right about one thing." Reading her body language, Rex and Shadow's muscles stiffened. "I don't want this argument, but it won't matter what I want if you ever touch my daughter again." "Is that dangerous?" Grim's hand vanished beneath his cut as he pushed off his bike. Nat's subsequent remarks were delivered with the icy accuracy of someone who had encountered more dangerous situations. "It's professional to do that. One that you will accept by walking away. Right now. Or what?" With his own palm veering toward hidden steel, Thunder challenged. Nat had a piercing smile. "Or learn why federal law considers military working dogs to be dangerous weapons." Rex and Shadow advanced as if at the same moment, their training turning them from subdued service dogs into weapons capable of fighting. Their attention was unwavering, and their quiet was more scary than any growl. Students watched in awe as the altercation played out via the school windows. Grim and Thunder were stuck in an awful situation. Backing down would cost them respect they couldn't afford, but drawing guns close to a school would bring heat they couldn't afford. The sound of distant police sirens made the choice for them. With its lights flashing, Chief Logan Parker's cruiser came around the bend. Then came 3 more patrol cars. Grim murmured, "Time to go," and hopped on his bike. "This isn't over, though." "No," Nat said in a low voice. "It's only the beginning. Chief Parker pulled up, grim-faced, and the Shadow Reapers roared away. Connor gave me a call. Are you alright? Alright, Nat said, observing the motorcycles vanish. However, we must discuss the response time of your department. Here, they enjoyed free play for 3 minutes. Parker's expression tensed. Today, half of my force phoned in sick. Abruptly. Suddenly. It clicked to understand. They're demonstrating their scope. How far they have already penetrated. Deeper than you realize, Parker said. Tonight's meeting of the City Council. Behind closed doors. Rumor has it that they are talking about cutting law enforcement's funding. Even after the threat had gone, Nat observed Rex and Shadow continuing their training as they patrolled the school's perimeter. We are being isolated by them. Removing official assistance. Parker's voice was full of real concern, Nat. We can't match the resources these individuals have. Perhaps. She interrupted him, so don't say it. Don't advocate giving in. They went too far by coming here. They now have to cope with the fallout. Emma waited in Dr. Grayson's office inside the school, her face displaying the same resolve Nat observed in the morning reflection in the mirror. Don't you think they'll stop? As Nat walked in, she inquired. Nat gave an honest response. However, we aren't either. Nat kept looking for tails on the stressful trip home. Because of their training, both dogs stayed vigilant, sensing that the task was far from over. She was already preparing retorts, analyzing potential outcomes, and spotting weaknesses. Connor texted her, and her phone buzzed. Shadow Reapers are requesting an urgent meeting. This evening. Mill for lumber. Then came another message. Don't do anything foolish, Nat. We are not yet prepared to move. However, Nat had already decided when she pulled into the driveway of her facility. This battle had been brought to her family by the Shadow Reapers. She would now demonstrate to them why that was incorrect. They had never dealt with a person who specialized in pursuing military targets, but they believed that their military training made them untouchable. They have never encountered an adversary that could read their moves, trace them through anything, or anticipate their patterns. Above all, they had never encountered a mother using 2 of the nation's most skilled military dogs to defend her child. That would be different tonight. The hunts would become the hunted tonight. Nat Grant was also going to teach the Shadow Reapers that the last thing they should ever do was to threaten the family of a dog handler. With the exception of security lights, darkness descended like a shroud over the lumber mill, creating harsh shadows that swept across the yard. Practiced silence, Rex, and shadow ghosting followed Nat as she made her way through the tree line. Blind spots in the Shadow Reaper's security, which only a military veteran would be able to identify, had been exposed by their previous reconnaissance. After 3 hours of observation, her concerns were validated. Not only members of the local chapter attended the emergency meeting. The temporary parking lot was packed with vehicles with out-of-state license plates. King's strategy, whatever it was large enough to attract powerful players from other regions. The quiet crackling of her radio said, "Nat, are you in position?" Connor's voice was hardly audible. She answered from the northeast corner that overlooked the main yard. Counting 8 cars and 12 motorcycles. High level of security. The DEA is mobilizing, but they must leave within 4 hours. We must wait. No, Nat interrupted, observing the arrival of another SUV. Now something is going on. King wouldn't take the chance of uniting everyone until absolutely necessary. She saw Victor King Haynes come out of the mill's office through her night vision scope. Other participants automatically straightened as he passed because his presence demanded attention. Nat recognized 2 faces behind him that chilled her. Judge Peterson and James Wright, a councilman. "Connor," she said softly. "Our difficulties are more serious than we initially believed. The city's leaders are present. They are engaged." There was a long silence. That explains why the department is under pressure. Reduction to the budget. The abrupt changes. Nat noticed that they weren't only occupying the streets. The infrastructure of the entire town is being overrun by them. She noticed movement. When a big truck backed into the loading bay, Rex's ears pricked up. The security pattern of the Shadow Rider changed, forming a safe passageway between the vehicle and the office. Nat reported that several targets were moving. It appears that they are carrying military-grade hardware and huge cases out of the office. Beside her, Shadow tightened abruptly, and Nat could feel more than just hear the deep growl in his chest. Someone was coming at them. Footsteps crunched through adjacent leaves as she told both dogs to hold, trusting their training. "Perimeter's clear," said a voice. The dog handler and her mutts were nowhere to be seen. Through a radio, Spectre's response crackled, "Keep looking. King wants to find her. She's trained in the military. Examine the approach vectors and the high ground." Although the footsteps stopped, Nat's thoughts were still racing. They knew she was onto something more than just their local operation since they were deliberately searching for her. She saw King's interactions with the municipal authorities via her scope. Their nonverbal cues indicated that they had met before. Everything was wrapped in black plastic as the truck was loaded quickly. "They're moving something big tonight, Connor. This is a distribution operation, not only a gathering. Listen to me." Nat Connor's tone was urgent. "We require federal support if city leadership is engaged. They will hide any evidence before we can take action if we make one mistake." However, Nat's focus was diverted by another object. One of the case's plastic wrapping had ripped, exposing a military marking she knew from her time in the military. Her blood froze. "They're more than just weapons," she muttered. "They are transporting military equipment that is classified. They are being fed equipment straight from base supply by someone." The heads of both dogs snapped around at a noise behind her. When Nat turned around, she saw that she was looking down a pistol barrel. In the shadows, Thunder's scarred face smiled. "Well," he responded quietly. "Check out what we discovered." Years of preparation took control, and Nat's mind immediately went into combat mode. Both Rex and Shadow stood motionless, awaiting her order. Thunder would discover why military dogs were regarded as deadly weapons after hearing just one phrase from her. However, she required more than one enforcer. She required evidence of the entire operation. She noted Thunder's finger position on the trigger and calmly replied, "Your boss is moving military hardware, amateur. That is well above the salary grade of some local MCs, and it's federal territory." Thunder's grin became wide. "Smart lady. You're too intelligent for yourself. King wants to speak with you directly." Nat's gaze followed motion in the darkness behind Thunder. He wasn't by himself. Out of the shadows, two more Shadow Reapers appeared with their weapons at the ready. She noticed, her mind already calculating angles, distances, and possibilities, that it was quite a welcome gathering. "You don't know what you've stepped into, lady," Thunder remarked. "You are dwarfed by this." "No," Nat said, indicating with a small movement of her hand the command that both dogs had been anticipating. "It's far larger than you are." What followed would serve as a reminder to Thunder of why military dog handlers were one of the most dangerous opponents anybody could encounter. The actual battle for Riverbend was about to start as the night descended into anarchy. As Nat got ready to demonstrate to the Shadow Reapers why harming a dog handler's family had been their worst error to date, the setting was illuminated by lengthy shadows created by the security lights of the timber mill. Thunder didn't anticipate the assault. Rex's silent charge knocked him off balance just as he had his pistol pointed on Nat. Years of military training had turned both canines into precision weapons, and as Shadow engaged the right-hand target at the same time, the pistol fired harmlessly into the air. Before the gunshot's echo subsided, Nat was already moving, her muscle memory taking over. She was already inside his guard when the third Shadow Rider brought his weapon around. His gun joined Thunder's in the undergrowth after a swift blow to the throat and an arm lock he had acquired in combat school. "Stay down," she ordered, pinning the struggling rider with her whole weight. Because of their training, Rex and Shadow were able to subdue their targets with precisely the right amount of pressure without causing significant harm. With blood dripping from the spot where he had struck his head in the fall, Thunder wheezed from his place beneath Rex. He gasped, "You're dead." After binding her prisoner's hands with zip ties and telling his military suppliers that their hardware was ending up in civilian hands, Nat interrupted King, saying that King had more pressing issues. The gunshot attracted attention, and shouts came from the lumber plant. As more Shadow Reapers stepped forward to investigate, beams of flashlight pierced the night. Nat secured the final set of zip ties while speaking into her radio, "Connor." The noise level simply increased. "At Point Bravo, extraction is required." The detective was already on the move. "What did you do, Nat?" Retrieving a dropped cargo manifest from Thunder's jacket and 3 inmates who might testify about the involvement of municipal officials, she responded, "I got proof of military connection." At the lumber mill, engines roared to life. Rex and Shadow instantly changed places, protecting their escape route while keeping their victims under control, in response to Nat's series of hand signals. Thunder spat blood and glared up at her, saying, "You have no idea what's coming. King has unimaginable connections. Military. The government. I needed to hear that so much." With a sad grimace, Nat showed off the tiny recording device attached to her collar. "I appreciate your confession." There were flashes at the tree line. Over a radio, someone yelled coordinates. Time was not on their side. "Shadow, Rex, escort," Nat ordered. Her prepared escape route was instantly followed by both dogs as they herded their prisoners through the underbrush. She had learned from years of training missions to always have several routes out. As the Shadow Reapers advanced on their final known position, shooting erupted throughout the night. However, Nat and her group were already on the move, with the dogs ensuring that their prisoners remained in order as she made her way through the shadows. At the meeting spot, concealed behind an abandoned gas station half a mile distant, was Connor's unmarked vehicle. As Nat restrained the inmates in the rear seat, 2 other dependable officers concealed their approach with firearms. As she hopped in, Connor muttered, "Department's compromised. They cannot be taken to the station." Nat instructed them to go to Maria's veterinary clinic. "No one will bother to look at her safe kennels in the back." More cars thundered by on the main road as they withdrew, Shadow Reapers on the hunt. Emergency lights at the lumber factory flashed, and Nat peered from the rear window. "They called it in," noted Connor. "Evidence will be destroyed by their pet cops, who will be everywhere." "Not important." Nat held up the manifest for shipping. "We have evidence of the trafficking of military gear. Federal jurisdiction is then involved. That cannot be stopped by local corruption." From the rear seat, Thunder let out a laugh that was devoid of humor. "Do you believe this is merely a matter of stolen firearms, lady? King has politicians and generals in his pocket. A war you can't win has just begun." "No," Nat told him, looking at her phone as texts began to arrive. "You didn't realize you were losing until I stopped it." Guard, Rex, and Shadow. Both dogs moved, their unwavering stares causing the inmates to recoil. Although the Shadow Reapers were accustomed to being predators, they had never encountered real war dogs. An incoming call from an unidentified number buzzed through Nat's phone. The other voice was clipped and formal. "Grant, the Staff Sergeant. I just received Detective Connor's upload of your material. This is Agent Rivera from the DEA. We are currently mobilizing." "For what length of time?" "At least 4 hours. Can you keep everything under control till then?" Unaware of their target lurking in plain sight, Nat watched another set of Shadow Reapers thunder by their location. "They will strike back. Hard. Most likely, target my facility first. Send a message if you can. We can have response teams from the FBI. Nat interrupted her. Allow them to arrive. When this goes down, just get your personnel ready to migrate throughout their entire network. I'll keep their attention on me. She was already making arrangements when she hung up. She would be expected to flee and hide by the Shadow Reapers. She was going to do what she had been trained to do instead. Backfire on their own strategies. Nat. Connor's tone was foreboding. You're considering making use of your establishment as bait. They threatened Logan, my daughter. Jeopardized our community. Sold out their nation. She had a chilly, steely voice. Now is the moment to demonstrate to them what a true military reaction looks like. Something in her tone made Thunder in the back seat stop laughing. The Shadow Reapers had used corruption and terror for years to establish their kingdom. However, no one who had dedicated their professional life to pursuing greater dangers than themselves had ever confronted them. Nat Grant was going to remind them why the most dreaded tracking teams in contemporary warfare were military canine units. And it would begin tonight at her facility, where she would demonstrate to King's entire group why the last thing they ever did was to harm her family. It was in the dark that Nat's dog training facility changed. Hours earlier, the area had been a professional dog training facility, but now it looked like a military forward operating post. As Maria Santos assisted Emma in packing necessary items, she made deliberate movements, transforming familiar areas into protective positions. Nat pointed to the back part of the structure and told Connor that the kennels were reinforced concrete. Separate ventilation system and steel doors. It was initially intended for quarantine situations, but Emma will find it to be the ideal safe haven. Will you actually utilize your own facility as bait? Maria inquired. Behind the building was a discreetly parked vehicle from her veterinary practice. These are more than simply goons, Nat. They used to be in the military. Exactly, Nat said, looking at the motion sensors she had put in years before but had never required. They'll have a military mindset. Anticipate military strategies. Their weakness is that. During their patrol around the perimeter, Rex and Shadow did not act casually as they typically did during training. They were aware of the change in the air and reacted to Nat's vigor with increased vigilance. Mom. The strength in Emma's voice caused Nat's chest to constrict with pride. I have everything you mentioned, even Dad's old satellite phone. Nat stopped preparing and looked at her daughter's face. You realize that things are going to get ugly? When the Shadow Reapers see what we've done, they won't hold back. I am aware. Emma's chin came up a little. We're not holding back because of this. After checking the perimeter, Connor came back with a somber expression. They have already begun to mobilize. When their pet policeman called in sick for tonight's duty, police scanners lighted up. The board is being cleared. Excellent. Nat spread out the drawings for the facility and nodded. You have Emma's contingency plans, Maria? The vet patted the keys to her truck. Emergency procedures are in place. We're gone at the first hint of serious difficulty. The basement of my clinic is ready and stocked. Updates from Nat's security system buzzed on her phone. Her property's edge motion sensors had begun to activate. As she had anticipated, the Shadow Reapers were conducting preliminary reconnaissance. Observing the alarm pattern, she said, they're testing our perimeter, searching for security flaws and blind spots. Observe their two-person team movements. Traditional force recon strategies. Connor said, you sound almost admiring. Nat added, know your enemy, as she made last-minute changes to her plans. They are good. Expert. However, they are waging the last war with strategies that were created for other battlefields. After their patrol, Rex and Shadow came back and took up flanking positions next to Nat. She checked their tactical vests one last time before kneeling between them. The dogs knew how important the equipment check was, so they stayed motionless. With her hands working with experienced efficiency, she whispered softly, "Boys, this isn't a training exercise anymore. We demonstrate to them tonight the capabilities of actual fighting dogs." One motorbike engine rumbled in the distance, followed by another. Reconnaissance for the Shadow Reapers was completed. They were starting the initial stage of their retribution. Connor pulled out his gun and looked at the magazine. "Nat. This is the final opportunity to summon FBI tactical troops." "No," she stood and shook her head. "That is what they would anticipate. Standard operating protocols and official response teams. One handler and 2 war dogs who specialize in hunting prey just like them are something they don't anticipate." Maria completed packing her truck with the remaining emergency goods. "Vehicles for extraction are prepared. Are you certain that the outdated quarantine procedures will be used?" Nat affirmed. "They'll believe the kennel is our backup position, won't understand that it's our main line of defense." Traditional military reasoning. Think of the obvious fortification as a last use. More motorbikes came up, their motors purposefully loud, a forceful display intended to frighten. As planned, Nat looked at her watch. She moved to the security monitor station she had put up and said, "They'll hit us in waves. The purpose of the first wave is to intimidate us into running. The second wave, most likely their former military corps unit, will be serious. The third wave? The third wave?" As she assisted in inspecting the backup communications equipment, Emma stood up taller and asked. "King himself will be the third wave," Nat said sternly. "After the first 2 waves fail, he will want to deal with this directly. He can't do anything else because of his ego." Updates from his few surviving trustworthy cops crackled over Connor's radio. Members from other chapters were being drawn in as the Shadow Reapers mobilized in large numbers. They were coming to set an example, not only to demonstrate their strength. Nat told them all it was her last chance to back out. The Shadow Reapers won't stop until they're done, no matter what, once this begins. Before Maria went to her van, she gave Emma a hug. "At the school, we refuse to give in to them. Now, we're not going to back down. Investigator." Nat gave Connor a raised eyebrow. In answer, he chambered around. "When you're done with these fools, someone has to be here to take them into custody." The rumbling of heavier cars now joined the growing volume of motorbike motors. Subtle cautions were used to end the Shadow Reapers. They were bringing everything they owned, and they were coming in force. As they had done countless times before combat operations, Nat gave Rex and Shadow their last pre-mission check. Both canines were completely focused on their training, which replaced any hint of domestic behavior with military accuracy. "Emma." Nat looked at her daughter. "Do you recall the signals?" 3 clicks indicate. "Proceed to the kennel, close the door, and keep the radio quiet." Emma concluded. "Mom, I do remember. This is within our grasp." As Nat saw her daughter manage the stress, she was filled with intense pride. The Shadow Reapers believed that their strength lay in frightening her family. Rather, it was their deadly error. At the end of her long commute, she saw the first wave of motorcyclists appear through her security feeds. They were on time and as predictable as their military training had taught them to be. "And now," she said quietly, "we demonstrate to them why a dog handler's family should not be threatened." Nat Grant was ready to give the Shadow Reapers a lesson in practical military tactics they would never forget as the night descended into meticulously planned pandemonium. The first wave of Shadow Reapers, consisting of 20 bikers and 3 SUVs, thundered up Nat's driveway. The apparently silent facility was illuminated by their headlights, which pierced the night. As he led squads into prearranged positions, Grimm's scarred face could be seen in the surveillance feeds. As Nat watched their deployment, telegraphing their positions and bunching up in kill zones, she mumbled, "Amateur hour." She gave a single keystroke on her radio, telling Emma to go to the safe kennel area. Beside her, Rex and Shadow stood unmoving, their training enabling them to remain completely still in the face of impending danger. Nat watched the Shadow Reapers set up a perimeter through her monitors, just as she had expected. Connor reported silently from his observation point that the First crew was moving in. Standard breach formation, 6 men. Nat put her palm on Shadow's tactical vest and said, "Wait for it. Let them make a commitment to the strategy." As the first team arrived at the entrance to the main building, their motions demonstrated their military experience. Hand signals, coordinated movement, and stack-up formation are all precisely according to the text and entirely predictable. "Are you certain about this?" As additional Shadow Reapers took their places, there was strain in Connor's voice. Nat grinned icily. Using strategies created for several battlefields, they are engaged in combat in the final conflict. She observed the group getting ready to breach. The basic rule of military operations was forgotten. Nat's trap started to take shape when the lead Shadow Rider kicked in the door. The sprinkler system in the building came on immediately, but the air was filled with industrial-grade pepper spray rather than water. As the well-planned attack descended into chaos, the first team staggered retreated, blind and cursing, their radios crackling with panic. A dog handler's domain should never be entered without air control. Nat watched the monitors as she finished. "Shadow, Rex, get involved." Following prearranged paths, both dogs emerged behind the blinded team, moving like shadows. They struck silently and precisely, using deliberate force to target the arms and legs. They were able to subdue without causing permanent harm because of years of military experience. Connor reported that the second team was moving to support. Nat, however, was already on the move. As the second team turned the bend, their focus on their suffering teammates, she came out of her hiding place. She was unexpected by the original Shadow Rider. His weapon clattered uselessly away after a fast blow to the throat and an arm lock he had acquired in fighting school. Controlled mayhem occurred throughout the night. The Shadow Reapers were forced to split their focus as Rex and Shadow moved like well-oiled machines and launched synchronized attacks. As they used their own momentum against them, Nat moved through their haphazard ranks. As they regrouped by the cars, Connor said, "They're falling back." Nat could hear grim barking commands through her tactical earpiece as he attempted to rearrange his troops. "There is just one woman and 2 dogs, so move forward." Nat silently corrected, "One handler," which started the second part of her defense. All of the building's exterior lights went out at once, leaving the neighborhood completely dark. 2 dogs trained for combat. No human could see as well at night as Rex and Shadow. They transformed into living weapons in the shadows, advancing fearlessly into the ranks of the Shadow Rider. For this particular situation, Nat had prepared them to have the most possible psychological impact with the least amount of physical harm. "What on earth is this?" Shadow emerged from the shadows and took down one of the Reapers with clinical accuracy, causing him to scream. Grimm's voice suddenly carried panic, "Fall back. Everybody collapses back onto the street." It turned into a rout. As the initial wave retreated, bikes roared to life, abandoning their injured comrades and broken cars. Nat, now counting down to the second wave, saw them go through her night vision goggles. Connor claimed to have joined her position, causing police bands to go berserk. Their dishonest police officers are attempting to coordinate a response, but they are receiving contradicting directives. Nat checked her watch and said, "Because their real commanders are coming." It was only a warm-up. Next up will be King's recon team from X-Force. Her long-range motion sensors activated at the perfect moment. There are several cars coming from various directions. An expert tactical deployment. "Nat," there was caution in Connor's voice. "These are not going to be weekend warriors pretending to be soldiers. These are real veterans of combat." "All right," she said, gesturing for Rex and Shadow to reposition themselves. "After that, they ought to know exactly what they're getting into." How many veterans of combat do you know who would voluntarily enter the planned defensive position of a K-9 unit? Through their captive radio, a fresh voice crackled. I'm king, all teams. Agree with my stance. Now we're doing this correctly. As she took one last look at her dog's tactical outfits, Nat grinned grimly. Every trap had been set by the initial wave of Shadow Reapers. Each misdirection. The real test was about to begin. Confronting adversaries who genuinely understood their craft. Go back to secondary position, Connor, she said. Keep an eye on the west. Now that they know the straight path is compromised, they will attempt to flank us. How about you? The advanced fighting dog methods that King's personnel were not exposed to in force recon will be introduced to them by us. Nat could hear cars coming with military accuracy through her tactical gear. No more overt approaches or blaring engines. The Shadow Reapers had finished their games. But she was, too. They were going to discover why military K-9 units were regarded as force multipliers in combat operations after threatening her daughter and corrupting her village. Nat was going to demonstrate to King's entire organization why it was a mistake to threaten a handler's family only once, and the true war for her facility was about to start. Through the darkness, King's pros moved like ghosts. Their strategy differs greatly from the chaotic initial wave. These were warriors who knew how to fight. Who was able to counter conventional defense positions. The benefit of darkness was offset by their thermal imaging apparatus. They were shielded from additional chemical deterrent by their gas masks. Connor murmured over the radio that many teams had coordinated their approach. They interfere with regular police bands with their broadcasts. As the elite unit of the Shadow Reapers formed a proper perimeter, Nat observed through her tactical display. No motion was wasted. No holes that are readily apparent. These weren't soldiers dressed like weekend warriors. These were real veterans of combat. She whispered to Rex and Shadow, now it gets interesting. Both dogs read her delicate body language and stayed still. It's time to demonstrate to them what authentic K-9 combat looks like. King's Point team gave the first clue that something was amiss. The facility's heat signatures were visible through their thermal imaging, but something wasn't quite right. One operator reported several duplicate heat sources. Clean reads on target areas are not possible. Nat grinned glumly. Thermal imaging became unreliable due to the misleading signatures produced by the industrial heat lamps she had placed months before. Regular military counter-surveillance with a twist from a K-9 handler. As the Shadow Reapers changed their strategy, Connor cautioned, they're adapting. A two-team leapfrog strategy that considers every possibility. Allow them to come, Nat said quietly. Protocol, Rex, Shadow, Ghost. Both dogs vanished into their designated spots. Nat had been preparing them for this very situation for years, working with experienced operators who were familiar with common military strategies. With a lack of practice, the first team broke through the outside boundary. Professionally and meticulously, their point man swept corners with his silenced pistol. But he didn't realize that something much more advanced was after him. Instead, he was searching for human threats. As instructed, Shadow struck first. A ghostly presence rather than an actual attack. A sound here, a hint of movement there. It had an instant psychological effect. Although these personnel were aware of the dangers posed by military canines, they had never seen any that were specially trained to thwart their own strategies. One operator growled as they moved to the south corner. Not a clean shot. Another said there were several encounters. His businesslike composure crackled a little. Positions cannot be locked down. Nat made one keystroke on her radio. The second round of their resistance began when Connor deciphered the signal. Focused ultrasonic emitters came into action, sending out frequencies that disrupted human balance but wouldn't harm Rex and Shadow. Though slight, the impact on coordinated movement was severe. Their practice shortfall, weakened by an unidentified inner ear disruption, caused the Shadow Reaper's exact formations to falter. An operator snarled, "Something's wrong. This defense isn't typical." Through their command channel came a fresh voice. King himself, keeping watch from his command car. "Put an end to your game with her. Set it on fire." Everything changed with the order. There were incendiary devices. Hardware of military quality that shouldn't be in the hands of civilians. Nat's mouth clenched as she identified the apparatus. Evidence of their link to military supplies, but also a direct danger to her entire establishment. "Connor," she yelled. "Charlie, emergency protocol. Right now." Instead of harassing, Rex and Shadow took direct action. They hit the incendiary-carrying operators at the same time. They launched a vicious and accurate onslaught. And utterly quiet. 2 of the Shadow Reaper's best soldiers were downed and the devices neutralized by the time the group recognized what was going on. Someone shouted contact. "These dogs are not like the others. They're not attacking as they usually do. They aren't attack dogs," thus King's voice was revealing. "They are trackers for hunters. Dogs for special operations." Nat was on the move already. King's insight meant that the whole dynamic was altered. These were men who had been in war zones. They were well aware of the capabilities of military tracking dogs. King commanded them to return to their defense positions. "Plans have changed. You're greenlit, Spectre. Make the shot." The night was broken by the crack of a powerful gun. Nat had just been standing there when the round hit her. An expert marksman at the ideal position. In order to assess what they were up against, they had kept their greatest assets hidden. According to Connor, the sniper team moved to a higher position to the southeast. "They're attempting to confine us." Nat's thoughts whirled with possibilities. The Shadow Reapers had just advanced to highly capable military equipment. Devices that demonstrated their links but also increased their level of risk exponentially. Now she ordered 3 clicks on the radio. Emma and Maria would go into emergency evacuation mode upon receiving the signal. The security of the kennel was going to turn into a liability. Another shot boomed overhead, and Connor cautioned, "They're bracketing our position. Expert staff and top-notch military equipment." "Good," said Nat, who was already carrying out her backup plan. "That was precisely what we required. Evidence of their supply chain. Rex, Shadow, and Delta XFIL protocol." Immediately, both dogs went to evacuation positions. This is what they had trained for. The point at which the most effective offensive strategy was tactical retreat. Nat witnessed King's troops launch a proper military confinement maneuver through her tactical display. They were on the verge of failure because they were following the text exactly. "Connor, do you realize how different we are from them?" As they prepared their next move, she inquired. "Are they doing a military mission?" "They're battling like soldiers, exactly." Nat grinned menacingly. "We're engaged in hunter-style combat." King's professional squad would soon learn the distinction between military manhunting and military operations. Additionally, Nat was going to explain to them why K-9 tracking units were the most dreaded adversaries in contemporary combat. On thermal imaging, the tactical withdrawal appeared flawless. Nat's heat signature fell back under expert pressure, moving precisely as a skilled operator would. King's squad moved steadily forward while sticking to the standard pursuit formation. It was all in line with regular military doctrine. Their first error was that the shooter reported a target traveling northeast, leaving a protective covering. King's voice was a gratified crackle. "She's on the run. She should, as the handbook states. Every team collapses the pocket. Keep her from regrouping." Rex and Shadows moving through shadows that their technology couldn't penetrate were not visible on their infrared imaging. Nat had spent years creating methods that were expressly intended to thwart military monitoring. Because of the thermal masking on their tactical vests, the dogs were undetectable by conventional imaging. Another operator reported that the target was still moving away from the primary building. "Is it okay to pursue?" "All right," King said. "However, keep an eye out for." "Hold on." His tone became piercing. "The dogs are nowhere to be found." The inquiry was made too late. First to strike, Rex appeared behind the spotter of the sniper team. No growl, no bark. Just quiet efficiency as he turned off the communications devices and vanished once more. Shadows used uncertainty and darkness as weapons when they fought their flanking team at the same time. Someone claimed that they had lost communication with Team 2. The breakdown of professionalism. There was no radio answer. Through their own command channel, Nat's voice was captured by Connor's technical prowess. Military operations in enemy territory are subject to the first rule. The battlefield should never be chosen by the enemy. The meticulous structure of the Shadow Reapers started to disintegrate. Rather from being prey, these men were accustomed to being hunters. Being followed by unseen predators had a profound psychological influence on combat-trained instincts. King saw that she was luring us in. The retreat was. Nat confirmed via their channel that it was tactical bait. "King, you're not up against a soldier. You have a hunter on your hands." "What about my dogs?" "They aren't weapons. Apex predators are what they are." Rex and Shadow hit again, as if to make her message more clear. The communications of two further teams were silently cut off. As invisible dangers circulated among them, the remaining operators' discipline broke down and they started shooting at Shadows. King ordered them to fall back to the rally point. Complete team building. "I wouldn't do that," Nat said with icy humor. "You're relying on those thermal signatures. These teams aren't yours." The Shadow Reapers had just arrived at their backup position when the revelation struck. They had been using industrial heaters to lure their own soldiers into perfect containment, and the heat signatures they had been tracing were decoys. Connor used Nat's secure line to advise that DEA squads were approaching from the north. Tactical FBI forces are moving in from the south. They're confined. King's reaction was swift and brutal. "Set everything on fire. The soil is completely burnt. If we're sinking." When Shadow eventually arrived in his command truck, the remainder of his order was interrupted. After years of vehicle interdiction training in conflict zones, the German Shepherd was able to stop the engine with practiced effectiveness. "Are you aware of your actual error?" Nat asked, coming out of the shadows behind King's back. Beside her, Rex appeared, both dogs now gliding with deadly elegance. "You forgot that there's always something higher on the food chain, even though you believed your military training made you apex predators." King slowly turned, reaching for the steel that was hidden. Nat grinned menacingly. "I wouldn't. Rex here taught insurgents the precise lesson on 3 tours in Afghanistan. You can't keep up with him. Much quicker. Do you think we're the end of this?" King's voice was filled with barely controlled anger. "You won't believe the connections we have. Political protection and military supplies." "I am aware." Nat interrupted him. "That was the main focus of tonight. Enabling the deployment of military-grade equipment in a non-military area. Demonstrating the source of your supplies." She gestured to the forests around them. "All captured on several cameras. Those incendiary devices are of special interest to the DEA. Batch numbers that are identical to those of a recent base theft." The roar of oncoming traffic intensified. King became aware of the entire scope of the trap, and his professional mask cracked slightly. "Tactical withdrawal was just displayed by your skilled operators." Nat went on. "Let me now show you something that isn't taught in force recon. Why military dog handlers are regarded as the most hazardous trackers in contemporary combat. You've passed away. King growled. Even if you dismantle our company. He was interrupted by Rex's snarl. It was both dogs' first sound of the night. It also carried the authority of generations of predators. Your company just fell apart. Nat told him. Federal teams hit your weapons caches while you were concentrating on me. It's incredible how simple it was to locate them after we had probable cause based on the evidence from tonight. Suddenly, as FBI tactical teams came out of hiding, the area was filled with lights. The elite operatives of the Shadow Reapers were encircled. In the face of enormous federal authority, their military training was ineffective. One final lesson. Agents moved to secure King as Nat said. The next time you want to threaten a family member, verify that their level of violence is not superior to yours. Connor came over, satisfied with the Shadow Reapers he had taken. On their supply chain, DEA is already taking action. Their base contacts are being arrested by military police. The entire network is failing. Between Rex and Shadow, Nat knelt. By habit, I checked them for injuries. Both dogs remained focused on the fight, realizing that the mission was far from over. Nat Connor's tone faltered. Maria told us. The evacuation location is experiencing an issue. Someone was aware of your contingency plan. She jerked her head up. A feeling of icy certainty settled in her stomach. It was not yet darkness. The capture of King was only the first step. They believe they are going to attack my vulnerability. Standing calmly, she said. Rather. They will soon discover why you should never confront a mother who is defending her child. The quest was about to become serious. Nat Grant would also remind the other Shadow Reapers. That's precisely why military dog handlers were the most dreaded trackers in contemporary warfare. Nat's world became narrowly focused. The instant Maria was warned by Connor. The triumph over King and his best team was immediately forgotten. Every instinct for fighting. All tracking abilities. During 15 years of military duty, every lesson was centered around a single goal. Getting to her daughter. Speak to me. As she moved, she sent an instruction into her radio. She was accompanied by Rex and Shadow. They changed their stance from fighting to tracking. What was it that Maria said? Connor didn't fall behind. Coordinating with federal units already. They were driven off Riverside Road by 2 cars. Before losing touch, Maria was able to send a message. Protocol Echo is being implemented by her. Echo Protocol. Evacuation in an emergency when directly threatened. Maria and Emma had been regularly reminded of it by Nat. Never really think you'll need it. As she arrived at her backup car, her mind was racing with potential options. They were aware of the escape path. Checking her tactical equipment, she said. The contingency preparations were leaked. Someone familiar with our procedures. Connor concurred that it had to be someone from the department. He darkened his face. Someone has access to the protected witness paperwork, Nat concluded. A cold REA. Lization strikes. Chief Parker, where are you? Connor's quiet response was sufficient. They underestimated the level of corruption. Last known place? She inquired. She was already mentally planning intercept courses. From the ancient industrial sector came Maria's message. Next to the defunct paper mill. Nat's mouth clenched. The ideal place for an ambush. Several structures. Roads with restricted access. Lots of cover. They're not attempting to flee. Another trap is being set. Nat. Connor had returned to his warning tone. The facility is not the same as this. These are not professionals in the military. They are criminals who are cornered. There is nothing left for them to lose. No, she clarified in a voice full of lethal assurance. They are the ones that are unable to comprehend the situation they are in. This is no longer a military operation. This mother is pursuing predators that pose a harm to her youngster. She looked at Shadow and Rex. Obtaining two little objects from the facility's Emma's chamber. Imprint the track, she ordered. The aroma of Emma's hairbrush caused both canines' nostrils to flare. Maria's from her extra scrubs, too. Will you follow them through the industrial area? Connor inquired, astonished. It's a huge location. No, Nat said, making one last check of her gear. I will pursue those who are pursuing my daughter. Predator Protocol, Rex, and Shadow. Immediately, the stance of both dogs shifted. This was no longer the norm for tracking. They had received training for this in battle areas. Hunting hostiles with weapons across difficult terrain. She spoke to Connor, I need you to coordinate with federal teams. Until I call for them, please keep them back. We work in silence. They'll be anticipating your arrival. I am aware. Predator was all over Nat's smile. We will not do anything they demand us to do because of this. Ahead was the industrial district. A tangle of dilapidated structures and corroding machinery. An ideal area for ambush. If you were working with conventional strategies. However, Nat had been honing her methods for this type of setting for years. Connor reported over her radio that there were several cars at the mill. At least 8 hostiles are seen on thermal imaging. They anticipate a direct attack. While performing last-minute equipment checks, Nat parked well outside their boundary. Recognizing the change in mission parameters, Rex and Shadow moved with concentrated effort. Remember your training, she said softly to them. Similar to the areas of conflict. Here, we are not the prey. At her hand gesture, the hounds dispersed and vanished into the darkness. After years of collaboration, they were able to work individually while yet being perfectly coordinated. Nat observed the movement of heat signatures around the mill complex through her tactical display. Poor placement and inexperienced security procedures. These weren't experts for King. These were ordinary thugs who harbored illusions about their military prowess. Connor reported movement within the main building. Maria and Emma appear to be in the 3rd level of the former office area. When Nat saw Chief Parker's signature amid the hostiles, her blood froze. Although the betrayal was painful, it also worked to her favor. Parker would be anticipating conventional police response procedures and thinking like law enforcement. She was already making her way through the darkness when she whispered, Connor, I need a distraction. Something to highlight the primary access road. Federal teams are waiting. Excellent. I want sirens and full lights on my mark. Make it appear to be a typical response to a breach. Through her tactical display, she observed the adversaries repositioning themselves in response to anticipated attacks. They never paid any attention to what was hunting them, they were only interested in the obvious approaches. Rex was the first to signal. Target acquisition is indicated by 3 clicks on the tactical channel. A few seconds later, Shadow confirmed. The building was surrounded by them. Mapped are hostile positions. Nat ordered the full response profile now, Connor. Federal vehicles sped up with sirens blaring, flooding the main route with emergency lights. As anticipated, the hostiles reacted by assuming defensive postures facing the alleged threat. Nat's actual attack started at that point. First to strike, Rex silently and effectively targeted their communications equipment. Shadow used tactics honed in battle zones to disable their vehicles at the same time. There's a problem. Through their hacked radio channel came a crackling voice. Contact with perimeter teams was lost. The tone of Chief Parker's voice was composed. Maintain positions. She is attempting to frighten us. Nat said, plugging into their frequency, No, Logan. I am pursuing you. There is a distinction. It had an instant psychological effect. These males were accustomed to being predators rather than victims. The realization that an invisible predator was pursuing them triggered deep-seated primal instincts. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. Parker made an attempt. This surpasses federal links in military contracts, you know. I am fully aware of my involvement. Nat interrupted him. A mother defending her child. The rest is just a detail. She walked around the buildings, hitting targets precisely where she wanted them to be, blind spots, and her dogs. They had been preparing for this same situation for years through training drills. Causing confusion, isolating targets, and separating enemy forces. Where is she? There was a demand with a hint of panic in their voice. There are those fucking dogs everywhere. Remain composed, Parker ordered. However, his power was eroding. The girl is still with us. We have power. Once more, Nat's voice sounded as frigid as the wind from the Arctic on their radios. Logan, this is your last opportunity. Give up now or discover why military dog handlers are regarded as the most lethal trackers in contemporary combat. Parker retorted, you're one woman with 2 dogs. We are in a better situation and have better numbers. No, Nat clarified, at last stating her stance. She appeared from the shadows just behind Parker, with Shadows and Rex appearing next to her like vengeful ghosts. Between a mother and her child, you have nothing but the worst possible situation. Parker whirled to get his weapon, but Rex was quicker. The chief was on the ground, his years of power having no value in the face of predatory efficiency. As Shadow collected up the remaining hostiles, Nat told him, the difference between us is that you think violence is about dominance. It's about hunting, I know. And now you're the prey. When federal teams broke inside the facility, they discovered that the problem had already been fixed. Nat ignored them, concentrating instead on getting to the office where Maria and Emma were being held. Mom, Emma said with pride and relief as Nat came in. I anticipated your arrival. They couldn't stop you, I knew. Nat checked her kid for injuries while giving her a firm hug. Everything you did was flawless. You too, she continued, nodding to Maria. Everything went according to plan with your backup plans. Maria grinned, but her eyes were tired. While we awaited rescue, we even had time to collect evidence. She raised her phone to reveal crisp footage of Parker working with the Shadow Reapers to discuss federal contracts and military supply lines. We underestimated the extent of the corruption, Maria added. Parker was merely an intermediary. Someone in a higher position is pulling strings. Through the window, Mech Nat saw the former police chief being handcuffed and taken away by federal investigators. Excellent. This implies that we can continue on the trail till we reach the summit. Rex and Shadow's goals shifted from battle to protection, and they took up protective positions surrounding Emma. The threat was still present, as the events of the night had demonstrated. It was only beginning a new stage. Joining them, Connor said, they'll try again. Whoever is truly responsible for this has too much at stake to abandon it now. Nat put her palm on Rex's tactical vest and said, let them try. They recently discovered the consequences of targeting my family. They will learn the consequences of threatening my village the next time. Federal activity filled the industrial sector as teams of investigators investigated several crime scenes. However, Nat's attention was already on the operation's next stage. Someone had tainted law enforcement, provided military equipment to criminal groups, and endangered everything she held dear. That someone was going to discover why the most dreaded hunters in contemporary warfare were military dog handlers. Because justice was no longer the only thing Nat Grant was fighting for. She was defending her family. She was more dangerous than any criminal empire could have ever imagined because of that. As analysts evaluated the evidence from the night's operations, the DEA's Mobile Command Center was bustling with activity. Watching the parts of a much bigger puzzle fit together, Nat examined the tactical display. A digital Pandora's box of encrypted emails, money transfers, and military shipment manifests had been unlocked by Chief Parker's confiscated phone. Agent Rivera placed materials around the planning table and emphasized that it goes well beyond the Shadow Reapers. They were merely the operation's visible component. The muscle. Through legal procedures, the true organization is hidden. Because of her military background, Nat was able to identify patterns that others may overlook as she traced connections on the screen. These supply routes and shipping timetables are being used to carry contraband through authorized military transport routes. Connor, looking over Parker's texts, agreed that someone with high-level access should do it. What did tonight's Shadow Reapers use? Identical batch numbers to equipment that allegedly vanished while being transported between bases. Not absent. Nat made the correction. Changed course. Examine the routing codes. These thefts are not sporadic. This is a methodical abuse of military logistics. Emma sat with Maria, watching security footage from the industrial zone, while Rex and Shadow stood guard nearby. Because of their training, the dogs had remained vigilant and knew that the task was not yet finished. "Do you have anything?" one of the DEA analysts yelled. Comparing military transport databases with Parker's contacts. Several ties to Fort Marshall's Logistics Command, Colonel James Whitaker. Nat felt the name as if it were a bodily blow. "Whitaker? Are you certain?" Connor saw her response. "Do you know him?" "He served as my commanding officer in Afghanistan," Nat said, recalling the incident. "Before I left service, the final tour." Though nothing was ever verified, there were allegations of lost equipment and abnormalities in the supply. Whitaker's file appeared on the main screen as Rivera pulled it up. "Is currently in charge of all Eastern Seaboard military transport activities. Ideal location for redistributing cargo, altering transportation routes, and producing ghost manifests." Nat knew that was why the Shadow Reapers possessed military-grade equipment. It wasn't being stolen. They were a much larger operations distribution arm. As new connections appeared, the tactical display was updated. Massive criminal organizations are concealed behind a complicated network of operations that appear legitimate, including shell firms and offshore accounts. Rivera pointed out that Whitaker isn't working alone. These activities need banking support, law enforcement collaboration, and political attention. Nat concluded that it was a shadow network, with the Shadow Reapers acting as their enforcers while the actual operation was conducted through the proper channels. A text message from an unidentified number buzzed through her phone. "You're only beginning to explore. On the old artillery range, meet. If you want the complete picture, come by yourself." "A trap?" Connor read over her shoulder and asked. "Obviously," Nat said, "but an opportunity as well. Someone in the company is concerned enough to get in touch." "It's too dangerous," Rivera objected. "We have enough to begin formal inquiries." Nat interrupted her, saying it would take months to deal with bureaucracy as witnesses stop speaking and evidence vanishes. Direct evidence connecting Whitaker to the operation is required. She looked across at Maria. "We didn't record the secondary safe house in official procedures, so get Emma to it." Maria understood and nodded. "The cabin? The whereabouts of your former training partner?" "Yes, Jake's apartment. No paper trail, off the grid. You take Rex with you. He is aware of the place. And you're bringing Shadow to see this enigmatic acquaintance?" Connor's voice was obviously worried. Nat affirmed that Shadow is the best tracker she has ever worked with. "He'll know before we do whether this is a trap. You'll have backup nearby if it's legitimate," Rivera said. There was no question. Nat's tone was stern. "No. They'll keep an eye out for it. They will anticipate standard surveillance and tactical squads." "Are you truly entering by yourself?" Connor insisted. Examining Shadow's tactical vest, Nat went over potential outcomes in her head. A veteran military dog handler is what they are anticipating. They are getting a woman who is fed up with people endangering her town and her family. 40 minutes outside the town was the artillery range. A deserted military training ground that is now covered in greenery. An ideal area for an ambush. Or for a dog handler with counter-surveillance training. She advised Rivera to be on the lookout for any indication of Whitaker's involvement. He'll start cleaning the house if he finds out we're watching him. How about King? Connor inquired. For forbearance, he might be prepared to make concessions. King is a soldier, Nat said, making one last check of her gear. Until the chain of command breaks, he will follow it. We must ascend. Shadow, aware of the change in mission parameters, moved with concentrated energy as they were ready to go. This was no longer about monitoring overt dangers. Hunting shadows inside shadows was what this was. Nat whispered to Connor, "Make sure Emma knows if anything happens." He interrupted her, saying that nothing would happen. Because you will remind everyone why the most feared operators in contemporary battle are military dog handlers. Nat forced a small smile. In fact, I was going to advise her to be aware of the backup procedures, the actual ones, not the ones listed in official documents. She crouched next to Shadow, making one last check of his equipment. The German Shepherd was completely focused and already looking about for danger. She said, "Hunt mode," and Shadow's body slightly changed position. They had no intention of meeting a contact at the artillery range. Anyone who believed they could control a dog handler would be hunted down. Rivera glanced toward Connor as Nat's car vanished into the night. She is about to fall into a trap. No, Connor clarified, observing the tactical demonstration. She is putting herself in their trap. There is a distinction. What is it? They fall into their trap believing they are a military operator. In reality, they're receiving a mother who is 10 steps ahead of them. He grinned glumly. It's far more harmful than that. As Nat and Shadow got closer to the artillery range, the night air hinted at impending rain. Ideal circumstances for tracking. It would be more sensible. Traces that are easier for Shadow's trained senses to detect. To arrange this encounter, someone had gone to great lengths. They were about to discover why it was a mistake that went far beyond tactical blunders to harm the family of a dog trainer. For Nat Grant was no longer only searching for proof. She was pursuing those responsible for putting her kid in jeopardy. She was more dangerous than anything in Colonel Whitaker's extensive armory because of this. The actual conflict was about to start, and this time, the city streets and deserted buildings would not serve as the battlefield. It would be the murky realm of political corruption and military logistics. A world that would soon discover why, in the context of contemporary combat, dog handlers were regarded as the best hunters. Like a spectral memory of wartime history, the deserted artillery range rose out of the shadows. It is a labyrinth of shadow and memory made up of abandoned buildings and overgrown training grounds. As Shadow looked around, Nat parked well outside the boundary and checked their stuff one more time. She learned more from the German Shepherd's body language than from any computerized surveillance. She deduced several presence indicators from his nuanced cues. 2 hours old or older. They had been preparing for some time. Shadow's ears picked up frequencies that were inaudible to humans and twitched toward the ancient command building. Nat had come to implicitly trust his intuition. He had demonstrated his capacity to identify threats before they became real during 3 tours in Afghanistan. Delta, hunt pattern, she muttered. Shadow blended in with the shadows as he vanished into the brush. They have done this innumerable times. Autonomous functioning while preserving tactical coordination. With seasoned skill, Nat navigated the gloom, spotting clues that an untrained eye would miss. Broken cobwebs in doors, fresh tire tracks obscured by foliage, and the subtle smell of military gear and gun oil. Nothing came on her radio. The person who set up this meeting was adhering to rigorous, professional, military-level communications discipline. She noticed movement ahead. A guy with hands in plain sight came out of the command building. Wearing ordinary clothing that didn't completely conceal her fighting conditioning, the woman had a military bearing. The woman said she was Captain Sarah Martinez. Intelligence from the former Army. We must discuss Colonel Whitaker. Nat remained where she was in the dark. Interesting location for the conference. It must have been somewhere they wouldn't anticipate, Martinez said. Too obvious a place for a business meeting. They are keeping an eye on all the usual spots. Private contractors were used to hire Whitaker's security crew, which consisted of former special forces. Ever since I began collecting evidence, they have been after me. As Nat had anticipated, Shadow's signal arrived through her tactical earpiece, 3 clicks signaling extra presence, and they moved into monitoring positions. During Whitaker's command rotation in Afghanistan, Nat said, "You were his intelligence officer." Martinez acknowledged that it took me 3 years to piece together the supply anomalies that I had first discovered, including equipment going missing from forward operating bases and shipping paperwork that didn't match reality. You're prepared to speak now because since they're becoming worse. It started with the Shadow Reapers. Whitaker's group is providing criminal organizations nationwide with military-grade gear. Utilizing legitimate cover, military documentation, and authorized transportation routes. The faint tremble in Martinez's voice was audible to Nat. Real fear, not showmanship. Have you got evidence? Better. Slowly, Martinez reached into her jacket. I've planned out the entire process. Political ties, banking records, and shell corporations. Everything. In her hand a USB drive materialized. Whitaker isn't the greatest. He reports to a person in Washington who has the power to suppress inquiries, reroute oversight, and manage promotions. Nat saw the laser sight just as Shadow warned her. Her instincts for battle took over, and she moved once. Down. Martinez fell as gunfire rang out through the darkness. Professional-grade sniper team. They had been anticipating the appearance of the drive. Martinez gasped as they hid behind concrete barriers and pursued me. It has to have a tracker. Not you. After interpreting Shadow's cues, Nat interrupted her. They had already arrived. Awaiting. You entered a kill zone. Around them, more gunfire struck. They were pinned by accurate fire as tactical troops took up positions. In order to manage approach vectors, Nat coordinated at least 3 distinct firing positions. Martinez understood that these were not contractors. Whitaker's personal security number is this. Top-tier operators. Good, Nat said, drawing Martinez's attention. This indicates that they are military-trained and predictable. They will follow their tactical doctrine to the letter. Shadow moved between firing positions unnoticed, like a ghost in the night. He was specifically taught by Nat to oppose professional military operations in this way. Do you have a plan to get out? As bullets chipped away at their cover, Martinez asked. Better. Nat grinned menacingly. I have a plan for the hunt. They believe they are conducting a strategic operation. They will soon discover the distinction between hunters and soldiers. She sent out a particular frequency by keying her radio once. Shadow answered right away. The activation of years of training. The night descended into well-planned mayhem. Shadow cut off the first sniper team's comms, and they went dark. Targeted attacks caused the second to lose their night vision equipment. A predator they did not anticipate threatened the third's position. Jesus, Martinez exhaled. That dog isn't simply trained for the military. Nat acknowledged that Shadow's specialty is chasing other special forces operators. After observing how predictable military tactics may be, I developed the procedures myself. As the tactical troops became confused, the gunfire ceased. As Shadow methodically isolated and negated their advantages, their well-planned attack disintegrated. Nat gave the order to move, guiding Martinez along prearranged paths. Next, they'll go to motion tracking and infrared. According to Martinez, the south exit is closed. At least 6 operators, I counted. 5 now, Nat said, pointing to Shadow's work. Be mindful of your steps. Secondary containment is always placed at clear escape routes by military forces. Because of Nat's deep understanding of dog operations, they were able to evade military coverage and walk through the darkness like ghosts. Like a deadly phantom, Shadow appeared and vanished behind them as he began his psychological assault. When they arrived at Nat's car, Martinez let out a gasp. Nat concluded, "It's likely that everything you need to know about the operation has been compromised. In the hopes that you would introduce them to new contacts, they let you keep it." Martinez's expression dimmed. This was all for nothing, then. No, Nat had a chilly smile. It was reconnaissance. We now have knowledge on Whitaker's personal team's capabilities, strategies, tools, and reaction times. You baited me. I assessed their techniques of operation by using their observation of you. Significant difference. Beside them, Shadow appeared, goal accomplished. There was silence on the artillery range. No chase, no more interaction. They're retreating, Martinez noted. Why? Because they understand that they are facing a situation for which they were not prepared by their tactical manuals. Martinez was assisted by Nat into the car. A military operator was what they expected. They discovered a hunter instead. Martinez cautioned, "Whitaker will know we met," as they withdrew. "He will erase evidence and clean the house." "No," Nat clarified. "He will follow instructions from military command training exactly. Prepare for siege warfare, fortify sites, and pool resources." What makes that superior? Because you can only deploy siege techniques when you're up against an army. Nat spoke with icy assurance. He isn't. They're hunting him. I now have a clear understanding of how his security staff works. As daylight drew near, they traveled through the night. Whitaker's tactical teams rallied behind them, tending to their injuries and pride. According to their after-action reports, a single canine unit acting outside of the bounds of regular military operations undermined the mission. Nat, however, was already thinking about the next stage. Unaware that she was banking on it, Whitaker would react with military precision straight out of a textbook. Because she was getting ready for a hunt, and he was getting ready for a conflict. With the weight of absolute power, Colonel James Whitaker arrived into Fort Marshall's command center. He walked through security checkpoints, causing subordinates to come to attention. He went over tactical upgrades with a granite-carved face. The briefing in the early morning was not going well. According to his security head, 3 teams were hacked. Although there were no significant injuries, a single canine unit acting in an unusual manner methodically incapacitated our best operators. Almost imperceptibly, Whitaker's jaw tightened. One of our former staff sergeants, Natalie Grant, became liable. Respectfully, sir, she is more than a liability. Her dogs aren't following the rules of the military. They are hunting our teams with methods we have never seen before. Whitaker, who was skilled at refuting our own tactical theory, responded icily since she created those methods. I ought to be aware. Her training program was approved by me. Surveillance footage from the artillery range was displayed on the big screen of the command center. Moves between military positions like a phantom, methodically undermining their operation. The security head cautioned that she is no longer merely a handler. She has transformed herself and those dogs into something new that is not covered in our playbook. The game was then altered. There was lethal conviction in Whitaker's voice. Reserve Protocol 7 full-spectrum reaction should be activated. His followers tensed up. Unrestricted warfare was what Protocol 7 implied. No restrictions, boundaries, or interaction guidelines. Our pals in Washington will cover that degree of response in a civilian area, sir. Whitaker interrupted him. I want every piece of leverage used, every contact made, and every resource deployed. Natalie Grant recently proclaimed war on the military supply chain as a whole. Tell her what that implies. Nat was already putting things in place across town. With Martinez offering intimate knowledge of Whitaker's operation and Maria and Connor coordinating intelligence, the safehouse basement had evolved into an unofficial command center. Martinez said, keeping an eye on military channels, he's mobilizing everything. Activated sleeper assets for local law enforcement by calling in markers from 3 private military companies. Nat studied tactical displays and responded, standard military escalation, known threat vectors with overwhelming force. Connor cautioned that this is more than escalation. They are erecting obstacles and starting communication halts. The entire county will soon be used for military operations. Nat observed Rex and Shadow taking defensive stances surrounding Emma. She could tell from the dog's alertness that they could sense the storm coming. Good, she said softly. Give Whitaker the freedom to think like a leader. Permit him to set up his control zones, deploy his troops, and carry out his tactical plan. What makes that good? Martinez made a demand. He has a tiny army of skilled operators, political coverage, and limitless resources. Because military leaders consider force projection and area control. Nat grinned icily. They overlook the fact that certain predators, particularly those that have been intentionally bred to hunt military operatives, flourish in contested areas. An incoming alert sounded on her phone. Several unidentified cars were seen entering Riverbend from various directions on security cameras. Teams of professionals moving with military accuracy. It's not just about you, Martinez understood. Everyone who is aware of the operation will be contained, and the entire town will be locked down. Start with your network of support, Connor continued somberly. My department, Maria's clinic, and all of your allies. No, Nat clarified. They start with the places that are readily apparent and the relationships that have been documented, which they believe to be my support system. Martinez's eyes came to understand. You can now stop using a parallel system. According to Nat, military handlers are trained to function on their own. Particularly those who focused on pursuing valuable targets behind enemy lines. As more of Whitaker's soldiers moved into position, the tactical display was updated. With professional curiosity, Nat observed their motions, taking note of conventions and trends. They're setting up a traditional containment grid, Martinez said. Conventional military doctrine for controlling metropolitan areas. With our own tools, Connor added sourly. Weapons and equipment that ought to be used to defend soldiers rather than endanger civilians. Nat retorted, looking at her own equipment, that's what makes it personal. They no longer only pose a threat to my family. Everything I work to defend is being tainted by them. She noticed Shadow's little change in stance. Something beyond human vision had been picked up by the German Shepherd's heightened senses. Computers glowed with encrypted data, Maria reported, and there was incoming transmission. Military grade, many channels. On their main screen, Whitaker's face emerged with a steel-carved expression. I'm giving you one chance to wrap this off professionally, Staff Sergeant Grant. Interesting word choice, Colonel, Nat quietly answered. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into, given how amateurish your organization has become. The extent of our construction. She interrupted him, saying, I know exactly what you've built. Everything we're meant to safeguard is being sold out by a criminal empire employing military resources. Whitaker grinned icily. Natalie, you think too tiny. Profit isn't the point here. It has to do with control. Establishing a system of authority that is unaffected by political control or the law. Nat mentioned the use of criminal gangs as enforcers. Betraying all of your oaths. He shot back, I'm offering you a place in it. Your abilities and training strategies could be extremely beneficial to our company. Use them as expendable resources, just like you did with the Shadow Reapers. In one way or another, they fulfilled their destiny, and so will you." His tone became stern. "You can give up in 1 hour. Everything you value then becomes up for grabs." There was a tense quiet when the broadcast shut off. It was broken first by Martinez. "He's serious. I have witnessed what happens to those who defy him. Complete ruin. Personal, professional, everything." After making last-minute equipment inspections, Nat said, "Let him try. He still deploys armies to manage territory and thinks like a leader." "And what are you thinking?" Connor inquired. "Similar to a hunter." Between Rex and Shadow, she crouched to inspect their tactical equipment. One important aspect of urban warfare that military leaders overlook is this. When used properly, it produces ideal hunting grounds. As Whitaker's forces set up their confinement grid, additional tactical data flooded Maria's computers. Expert operatives positioned themselves in the vicinity of Riverbend, ready to secure a whole town. "Nat," there was caution in Connor's voice. "We have never encountered anything like this before. These aren't dishonest police officers or criminal organizations. These are professionals in the military with boundless resources." "No," she clarified, getting up as her dogs shifted into postures of readiness. "I spent years learning how to counter the tactics used by these warriors in the past conflict. They will soon learn the distinction between military hunts and military operations." Nat's tactical display allowed her to observe Whitaker's forces getting ready for urban combat. They were following all the rules and putting faultless military doctrine into practice. And they were destined to fail for precisely that reason. Because Nat Grant was getting ready for a hunt while they were getting ready for war. She was going to remind everyone why the most dreaded predators in contemporary warfare were military canine handlers. As Whitaker's forces set up their containment grid, Riverbend became a militarized area. Expert operators established command posts and secured strategic places by moving through the city with tactical accuracy. Everything was in accordance with flawless military doctrine. Nat observed their deployment patterns through her tactical display. She noted a 3-tiered security arrangement. Typical urban warfare protocol, central command, inner control zones, and the outside perimeter. Martinez cautioned that they have every strategy covered, including full-spectrum surveillance, motion sensors, thermal imaging, military channels, and communication intercepts. Excellent. Nat took one last look at Rex and Shadow's specialist urban warfare equipment. Let them concentrate on managing the obvious. They're going to discover why regular combat teams and military canine groups train in distinct ways. Connor looked at Whitaker's deployment on the tactical overlay. They have increased security around your building, Maria's clinic, my department, and any other place they believe you might seek help. Maria resentfully remarked, using our own equipment against us, as she observed unmarked cars parked surrounding her clinic. Military-grade equipment that ought to keep soldiers safe. That's their first error, said Nat. They're securing sites without knowing how dog handlers really work. Buildings and equipment are not necessary for us. All we need are hunting grounds. Shadow's ears perked up a little, picking up on wavelengths that were inaudible to humans. Their wartime tours had taught Nat to understand his nonverbal cues. He was using the radio emissions from the operators to map their movements. According to Martinez, they are creating kill zones at significant crossings. Any movement through the city will be monitored and intercepted by tactical response units and sniffer teams. Nat clarified, by human operators using human logic. Observe. She ordered movement for Shadow and Rex. Years of collaboration led to the development of silent hand gestures. Like ghosts, both canines vanished into the city, merging with the shadows cast by the skyscrapers. What are they doing? As he observed the dog's activities on thermal imaging, Connor posed the question. Hunting, Nat said plainly. Controlling space is something military operators consider. Dog handlers consider taking use of it. Whitaker's outer perimeter squads were the first to show signs of trouble. Gaps appeared in their meticulously planned radio traffic, with communications equipment malfunctioning without prior notice or justification. Martinez relayed from the military channels that several teams were reporting equipment malfunctions. Systems for night vision were affected. Faulty tactical equipment. As she tracked her dog's progress, Nat emphasized that Rex and Shadow aren't just trained to track. Disrupting military operations, removing vital equipment, isolating troops, and confusing organized forces are their areas of expertise. They observed the methodical breakdown of Whitaker's confinement net through their tactical feeds. Unforeseen threats put professional operators in danger of losing their positions. Power supplies were surgically cut off, and sophisticated surveillance systems fell black. Martinez noticed the pattern and understood they weren't attacking the operators. They are assaulting their tactical control and coordination skills. According to Nat, military personnel rely on communications, technology, and established procedures. Even the most skilled operators become vulnerable and isolated if those are taken away. Tension could be heard in Whitaker's voice as it crackled through their recorded conversations. Every team keeps their positions. Grant's K-9 units should not cause you to break formation. Nat whispered, too late, as she saw the orderly deployment of his forces start to fall apart. Already, they are hunting rather than protecting. Through Whitaker's operation, the tactical display demonstrated the breakdown of military control, which spread like a virus. With their equipment unreliable and their protocols ineffective against an opponent they couldn't confront, professional teams who had been trained to operate in coordinated groups found themselves cut off. Connor noted that this goes beyond simple tactical disruption. Professional warriors are being subjected to psychological warfare by you. Understanding dawning, Martinez continued, breaking their confidence in their training, making them doubt all of their foundations. According to Nat, military personnel are trained to have faith in their tools, procedures, and chain of command. Even elite forces are susceptible to terror if that is taken away. Shadow's signal arrived via her tactical network, with 3 clicks signifying the location of the main targets. A few seconds later, Rex confirmed. Whitaker's command center had been located. Nat checked her own equipment and reported, they've identified the central nervous system. It's time for the next stage. You don't intend to attack their command post, are you? Martinez made a demand. They will have the best operators and the strictest security. Nat clarified, I'm not attacking anything. I am hunting. There is a distinction. Using the urban environment her canines had already studied, she stalked through Riverbend's shadows like a predator. Unaware that their adversary was used the city itself as a weapon, Whitaker's forces were searching for patterns of military movement. Martinez translated from command channels and several teams reported contact, but there was no real interaction. They hear sounds, see shadows, and perceive movement. Ghost protocol, Nat said. Causing them to doubt every sound, every shadow, and every seeming danger. Veterans of combat are aware of the psychological effects of being pursued rather than engaged in combat. She witnessed Whitaker's orderly operation degenerate into paranoid mayhem through her tactical display. Elite operators engaged imaginary threats by burning through ammunition, jumping at shadows, and firing at phantoms. Connor realized, you're not just interfering with their business. They're defeating themselves because of you. Nat retorted, military training produces predictable responses, as she approached the command center. The more a skilled operator depends on established protocols, the more susceptible they are to the failure of such standards. As he struggled to keep his composure, Whitaker's voice expressed increasing frustration. Every team has a position. Avoid chasing ghost contacts. She wants precisely this. As Rex and Shadow finished isolating the command center in a methodical manner, his message ended. Now, the center of his military operation sat by itself in a dead zone that they had made up, separated from their deployed troops. Through advanced optics, Nat silently observed the command center and stated, "Now they have a choice. Either move and expose themselves to direct action, or hold their position and gradually lose command of their soldiers." Martinez foresaw Whitaker's decision to take an aggressive stance. Complete military action to retake the situation. "Good," said Nat, gesturing her dogs to their st placements. "For it is precisely what we are relying upon." She observed Whitaker's forces getting ready for significant combat actions via her tactical network. Unaware that they were precisely playing into a hunter's strategy, they were ready to devote themselves fully to a military response. Connor warned Nat via her communication. There is no turning back if they commit to full military action. This turns into real urban conflict. No, she clarified, making one last check of her gear. This turns into a real search. They will soon discover why military dog handlers are trained to be predators rather than soldiers. The night was about to burst into well-planned mayhem. Nat Grant was getting ready to demonstrate to Colonel Whitaker why the last thing a military leader should do was to threaten a handler's family. Whitaker's reaction was just what his years of training as a military commander required. Tactical precision combined with overwhelming power. Through the streets of Riverbend, armored vehicles with roaring engines sprang from hiding places. Elite operators followed standard urban warfare procedures, moving in synchronized patterns. Martinez reported full tactical deployment, keeping an eye on military channels. Drones for close air observation, 3 strike teams, and heavy weapon support. This is being handled like a battlefield. Through advanced optics, Nat observed Whitaker's forces setting up their grid. Since they are aware of it, military leaders consider force against force and battlefield control. Martinez identified the movement patterns and cautioned that those were Delta operatives. The finest of the greatest. They will not be fooled by common countermeasures. "Good," Nat said, using her tactical network to verify the whereabouts of Rex and Shadow. "Let the best soldiers be them. We're not here to engage in combat." Concern grew as Connor examined the tactical display. "They're tightening the noose around your last known position as they deploy in a spiral pattern." Nat concurred, saying they should make the most of their superior numbers and equipment. Everything is according to the text. Ideal military strategy. What makes that good? As she watched armored vehicles secure key crossroads, Maria made a demand. Because they are engaged in the final conflict, Nat clarified. Employing strategies intended for traditional armies. They have lost the real purpose of military K-9 training. Through her tactical link, Shadow sent out a signal. Target identification is indicated by 3 clicks. A few seconds later, Rex confirmed. Whitaker's whole command hierarchy had been mapped. Martinez saw the pattern develop and knew they were doing more than just tracking positions. They are determining tactical weaknesses, command relationships, and important persons. According to Nat, military forces rely on hierarchy. Their coordination breaks down when their command structure is removed. Hunting insurgent commanders in Afghanistan taught me something. Through intercepted chats, Whitaker's voice conveyed icy power. Free weapons for all teams, shoot at sight. These days, Grant's K-9 units are seen as deadly threats. Connor cautioned that he had approved the use of lethal force in a civilian area. Nat said, because he's desperate. He is aware of what will happen next. Ghost Protocol Alpha, Rex, and Shadow. After years of rigorous training, both dogs traveled over urban terrain like shadows. They had evolved beyond military K-9s. These hunters were designed to disrupt professional military activities. What hit the initial strike team was never seen. At the same time, their night vision equipment malfunctioned. There was no communication. Their training never addressed the malfunctioning tactical equipment. Blind and alone were the professional operators. Martinez relayed from military communications that several teams were reporting equipment malfunctions. They are losing cohesiveness as a unit and tactical coordination. According to Nat, this is because they rely on technology and norms. Her hounds had already guarded the shadows they were moving through. Even elite operators become vulnerable if such are taken away. She observed Whitaker's forces attempting to adjust through her tactical display. As required by their training, they changed to backup systems, modified formations, and put emergency procedures into place. Martinez noted that they are relying on established operating procedures. Nat affirmed that this makes them predictable. Patterns are formed by military training. Vulnerabilities are caused by patterns. The following phase of attack by Rex and Shadows showed why military K-9 units received training that differed from that of regular soldiers. They did more than simply turn off the apparatus. They went after the operators directly. Elite warriors discovered they were being followed by undetectable predators. Enemies they never saw weakened their positions. As Martinez watched Delta operators break formation, he breathed the words, "Jesus." They're doing more than merely interfering with the process. They're making professional warriors feel anxious. Nat agreed, psychological warfare. Making them feel pursued rather than involved. Veterans of combat are aware of the distinction. Whitaker's voice was filled with increasing anger. Every squad upholds discipline. Don't allow her to break up our deployment. This is fundamental military doctrine. As Rex and Shadow proceeded to dismantle his army in a methodical manner, Nat whispered, "That's exactly the problem. Instead of thinking like a survivor, he is thinking like a commander." Whitaker's meticulously orchestrated effort was seen in the tactical presentation collapsing into chaos. Elite troops that had been taught to cooperate ended up alone. Their high-tech equipment is worthless. Their procedures were useless against a non-fighting adversary. It pursued prey. According to Connor, who was observing thermal imaging of dispersed teams, they're breaking. The world's best military operators are disintegrating. Since this is unlike anything they have ever encountered. Martinez went on. Being hunted by specialized canine units is not a part of their training. Moving closer to Whitaker's point, Nat clarified that military dogs are typically support assets. We are the only ones that train to battle troops hunting dogs. The signal from Shadow meant Whitaker's command post was now totally cut off. His elite security detail was entangled in the web of a predator. Incapable of efficiently responding or coordinating. The last stage, Nat ordered. Rex and Shadow executed the result of years of specialized training with deadly perfection. They were no longer merely military dogs. They were designed to be apex predators, and they were. Connor warned Nat via her communication. They will automatically use their maximum force if you push them too hard. No civilian casualties will occur. She interrupted him. Because Whitaker will soon discover the distinction between leading troops and dealing with predators. She observed the disintegration of his force's discipline through her tactical network. Elite operators engaged imaginary threats, burned through ammunition, jumped at phantom motions, and fired at shadows. Martinez understood that you're not simply defeating them. They're questioning everything they rely on because you're shattering them. Moving into final position, Nat responded, military training creates certainty. If you take that away, even the most skilled operators fall victim. Now there was urgency in Whitaker's voice. Every team has a fallback. Consolidate my stance. Deployment in full defensive mode. As Shadow and Rex finished encircling, his transmission stopped. Predators trained to seek soldiers had methodically removed the defenses from the center of his military operation, leaving it exposed. As Nat silently observed Whitaker's command post through advanced optics, she whispered, now he has one last choice. Give up or discover why military dog handlers are the most dreaded hunters in contemporary warfare. The distinction between military might and predatory skill was about to be illustrated by the night. Nat Grant was going to demonstrate to Colonel Whitaker why it was a folly that went beyond tactical blunders to harm a handler's family. Whitaker had set up a command post in the old courthouse in Riverbend, which stood like a besieged castle. Despite the turmoil that had engulfed their outside forces, elite operators held defensive positions around the perimeter, their discipline still intact. Nat observed their mechanically precise rotation of security patterns through her tactical monitor. Martinez reported the final count via secure communications. Whitaker's personal security detail is inside, along with the 12 operators who are still undergoing Delta-level training. While keeping an eye on thermal signatures, Connor remarked, they have enough hardware to hold off a small army, better defense, limitless ammunition, and military-grade gear. Good thing we're not an army, Nat said, using specialized sensors to monitor the location of her dog. Rex and Shadow were now fully encircled and merged with the cityscape. They're going to discover the difference, we're hunters. Through the captured channels, Whitaker's voice carried icy rage. Every team upholds the highest security standards. She will attempt to undermine our instruction and expose us to canine strategies. Martinez noted that he still believes he can influence the outcome by using superior force and tactical doctrine because this is a military operation. Moving through shadows her dogs had already secured, Nat confirmed his final error. Military leaders concentrate on winning conflicts. Hunters concentrate on eliminating their prey. Whitaker's perimeter troops were the first to show signs of trouble. Phantom contacts appeared on their advanced motion sensors. The thermal imaging showed erroneous signals. Unfeasible transmissions were detected by communication equipment. An operator reported that professional communication was cracking across several connections. None of them have clean reads. These trends are illogical. While observing her dog's psychological warfare, Nat said, because they're not meant to. Units of military dogs do more than just track. They hunt by confusing, frightening, and exposing their victim. She observed the disintegration of Whitaker's elite forces through her tactical network. These soldiers weren't your typical ones. They were the world's greatest operators. However, they had never encountered predators who had been specially trained to hunt their type. According to Martinez's translation of military channels, they're breaking formation, deteriorating tactical coordination and lost unit cohesion. Nat added, because they're trained to fight enemies, not to avoid being tracked down. There is a distinction. Shadow was the first to signal. 3 clicks signify the isolation of the principal objectives. A few seconds later, Rex confirmed. The defenses of the command post had been repeatedly breached. As Connor saw thermal imaging, he breathed Jesus. Not only are your pets interfering with their defense. By turning their own tactical reactions against them, they are causing them harm. According to Nat, military training produces predictable responses. Soldiers are more susceptible to specific hunting methods the more professional they are. Whitaker sounded increasingly desperate. Every team has a position. Avoid chasing ghost contacts. This is just what. As Rex and Shadow began their final approach, his message ended. A demonstration of predatory skill that went beyond basic military maneuvers was the result of years of specialized training. Many breaches, an operator yelled. They are within our boundaries. What did they do? Nat answered, although only her crew could hear, because they were never outside it. Defenses are not attacked by my dogs. They take them apart, progressively transforming security into risk. The courthouse's advanced defense system started to systematically collapse due to carefully planned interruption rather than direct attack. Communication breakdowns, sensor faults, and equipment problems are all synchronized to have the greatest psychological impact. Martinez understood that you're not just breaching their defenses. You're undermining their self-confidence and causing top warriors to doubt all of their reliance. As she arrived at her destination, Nat affirmed that military forces depend on certainty. Even Delta operators become targets if that is taken away. She witnessed Whitaker's surviving forces fall into defensive positions around the command post as a result of her tactical display. Their well-organized reaction was textbook flawless and of little benefit to the predator. Nat. She received Connor's warning via her calm. Whitaker's line to Washington is direct. He'll call an official military response the moment he feels truly threatened, she concluded. It is just what we require. His entire network, including his suppliers and connections, was compelled to come out. Shadow's signal meant that the inner security of the command post was now in jeopardy. In their own stronghold, elite operators discovered that they were alone. Predators they never saw turned their highly developed defenses against them. The last stage, Nat ordered. Rex and Shadow executed the result of their specific training, moving through the defensive layers of the courthouse like ghosts. They were no longer merely military dogs. Designed to hunt troops, they were apex predators. Martinez said many personnel were offline, keeping an eye on military channels. Their own command post is slipping away from them. Nat moved into position and responded, because they strengthened it against military threats. Not against hunters who have been taught to disrupt military activities. Now there was only anger in Whitaker's voice. You believe this is the end of it, Grant? This entire town turns into a military operations zone if I make just one call. Nat replied, hacking into his frequency, make it. Show the world how deeply rotten you are, how many officials you have hacked, and how many laws you have broken. As Rex and Shadow finished dismantling Whitaker's operation in a methodical manner, the final defenses of the courtroom fell. When faced with animals trained to hunt them, elite soldiers who had been trained to fight armies were powerless. It's over, Colonel, Nat said, her voice echoing over their intercepted conversations. Your forces aren't working. You've compromised your defense. Your business is exposed. It's time to discover why the most dreaded hunters in contemporary warfare are military dog handlers. As anticipated, she saw Whitaker reach for a secure phone, his direct access to corrupt authorities in Washington, through her tactical network. Nat, there was caution in Connor's voice. There is no turning back once he makes that call. This turns into a formal military conflict. No, she said, directing her dogs to their last spots. This demonstrates the extent of his depravity and makes it clear to all onlookers who he turns to for assistance. With just one number, Whitaker's encrypted phone provided direct access to power that could, with a single word, mobilize whole armed forces. He stood in the command center of the courthouse, surrounded by weakened security and ineffective defenses. His elite forces were methodically destroyed by predators they were unable to combat. Code of Authorization Sierra 9 Delta. He abruptly picked up the phone. Activation of the emergency protocol. I require a military reaction to civilian jurisdiction right away. Trace is active. Through Nat's tactical network, Martinez provided a report. Signal routing via classified networks, the Pentagon, DoD systems, and other secure routes. Keep a record of everything. Nat gave the order while keeping an eye on Rex and Shadow's psychological siege using specialist optics. Each and every authorization, response, and connection. The weight of high political office was in the voice that responded to Whitaker. This number is exclusively for serious emergencies, Colonel. It was intended that your operation be contained. With a clear reference to her own experience in military intelligence, Senator Phillips, Martinez recognized the voice. The Armed Services Committee's chairman. He is in charge of military logistics directly. We now have evidence linking him to the illicit trafficking of weapons. Nat confirmed, taking notes on everything she said. Colonel, keep him talking. Let's see just how deep this goes. Whitaker was careless because he was desperate. I must now be officially deployed to the military. The entire enterprise was compromised by Grants. She has proof of everything. Political ties, supply chains, the entire system. It's not possible, Phillips said sternly. When compared to what she has taught her dogs to perform, your security measures are ineffective. Whitaker interrupted him. These canine units are not typical. They are hunters designed especially to disrupt military activities. Nat observed the methodical breakdown of Whitaker's command post through her tactical display. Rex and Shadow were doing more than just breaking through barriers. The remaining operators were being herded into well-mapped-out containment areas. According to Martinez, several organizations are currently keeping an eye on the transmission. Military Criminal Investigation Division, DEA, and FBI. Real-time evidence of high-level corruption is being sent to them all. Nat responded, because Whitaker is doing precisely what military command training instructs him to do, recording everything, requesting official assistance, and adhering to the chain of command. Phillips sounded increasingly alarmed. Colonel, you have to know where you stand. Contain the situation if you are unable to do so. Whitaker's laugh was unfunny. She has exploited my security procedures to undermine my entire force, turning my own tactical philosophy against me. Now I need the military to step in. Phillips cautioned, consider this request carefully, deployment of the military against a civilian target. Nat interrupted, patching into their private channel, will expose everything. Every dishonest official. Every unlawful transfer of weapons. Each compromised operation. All were captured and sent to several federal authorities. The weight of crumbling civilizations was felt in the ensuing hush. Nat watched as alarms were sent across federal monitoring systems in response to Phillips' secure call through her tactical network. They couldn't keep the evidence from spreading too quickly. Phillips growled, you have no idea what you're interfering with, the power structures and networks we have established. Nat said icily, I know exactly what I'm interfering with. A criminal operation that violates everything we're meant to defend by employing military resources to arm criminal organizations. The rest of Whitaker's operators attempted to hold defensive positions, but their tactical unity was shattered by Rex and Shadow's psychological warfare. Elite warriors were entangled in the web of a predator. Their training was ineffective against hunters who were designed to destroy it. Senator, Nat added, her tone brimming with lethal assurance. All federal agencies are currently recording this call. Proving your involvement in criminal activities, political corruption, and the unlawful trafficking of weapons. Would you mind explaining that to a congressional investigation? Phillips responded right away. You're told to put an end to this, Colonel. Maximum amount of force permitted. Not a witness. We're going to admit that. Martinez attested to keeping an eye on federal channels. There is now concrete PR. Oof of criminal conspiracy at the top levels in several agencies. Whitaker will soon provide us with the conclusive evidence. Nat answered, using specialized optics to observe his response. At last, the colonel's military discipline collapsed. Every team follows Procedure 0. All targets are subject to lethal force authorization. Set everything on fire. His top operators reacted with efficiency that was pre-programmed. Getting ready to apply the scorched earth procedures. However, they had overlooked one important detail. Here, they weren't the top predators. Endgame, Rex, and Shadow. Nat ordered. Through the breached fortifications of the courthouse, both dogs moved like living shadows. Putting all of their specific training into practice. My God, exhaled Martinez. Observing the attack's thermal imaging. They're not merely assaulting. A professional military force is being methodically dismantled by them. Because they were designed to accomplish just that. Nat attested. Go after soldiers. Take operations down. Get rid of military dangers. If it weren't so deadly, Whitaker's last fortifications would have fallen with a precision that would have been beautiful. With surgical efficiency, elite operators were rendered disabled. They deactivated their weapons. They lost their tactical advantages. According to Connor, federal response teams are approaching. They have it all. The senator's admission. Whitaker's commands. Documentation of the entire plot. Not all of it. Nat made the correction. Heading for the command post. The concrete proof is still required. Shadow is safe. As the colonel grabbed for Whitaker's sidearm, the German Shepherd appeared next to him. Shadow showed why military dogs were regarded as deadly weapons, as the weapon clattered away uselessly. After being pinned by a predator he had assisted in training, Whitaker exclaimed, "You don't understand what you've done. The power dynamics you have shown. The companies you have hacked." Nat said, "I know exactly what I've done," and she walked into the command center with Rex at her side. "I've reminded everyone why the most feared hunters in contemporary warfare are military dog handlers." They could hear Phillips desperately attempting to limit the damage through the communications they had intercepted. In order to gather proof of a conspiracy involving the highest echelons of political and military authority, federal officials were scouting many sites. Nat secured Whitaker as federal officials broke into the courthouse and declared, "It's over, Colonel. The exact weapons you helped develop destroyed your operation, your corruption, and your whole network. Do you think we're the end of this?" Phillips's voice cut through the still open line with a furious rage. "You won't believe the connections we have." "Had connections," Nat said. "There are currently congressional probes, federal investigations, and a well-publicized scandal. It's amazing how rapidly light causes power infrastructure to fall." Out of habit, Nat knelt next to her dogs, examining them for injuries as federal officers guarded the scene. Recognizing that the task was not yet complete, Rex and Shadow remained tactically focused. Connor watched federal channels and warned Nat Phillips has resources left. He will attempt to conceal this. As she watched Whitaker being escorted away in handcuffs, she retorted, "Use political influence to let him try. The colonel is going to teach him the same lesson. Make sure you're ready to be hunted down before threatening a handler's family." The night had revealed a plot involving the highest echelons of the political and military establishment. More significantly, though, it served as a reminder to everyone of why military dog handlers were seen as the ultimate predators in contemporary combat. Riverbend became the epicenter of federal action following Whitaker's capture. While DEA investigators obtained recorded evidence of systemic corruption, FBI evidence teams analyzed many crime sites. Nat, however, stayed focused. She had learned from years of fighting that wounded power structures were most dangerous. According to Martinez, Phillips is using everything he has left to attempt to stop the transmission of information, including calling for favors, monitoring encrypted lines, and triggering emergency procedures. Connor added from his place at the computers in the command center that he had discovered multiple deletion attempts. They are attempting to destroy secure servers and the evidence trail. As Nat saw Rex and Shadow hold their security positions, she retorted, "Too late. Federal networks already reflect the evidence. There's more to come." Instead of official deployments, her tactical display revealed increasing activity around military installations within striking distance. The characteristics of private military contractors were evident in these movements. Martinez, who is clearly trained in military intelligence, verified that 3 tactical teams were mobilizing. A private contract is being used by ex-special forces. Phillips is attempting to tidy up the house. "Good," Nat replied as she silently checked her specialized gear. "Let him use what resources he has left. Make it clear to everyone how far he will go to hide this." They could hear Phillips organizing his frantic counterattacks through intercepted communications. Every team cleared the hot maximum force that was permitted. There is no proof left. Complete sanitization is maintained for all witnesses. He is directing that all those responsible be targeted for elimination. Martinez bitterly attempted to bury the probe through political pressure while avoiding official channels by utilizing private contractors to translate. By keeping an eye on government frequencies, phoning for every favor, threatening every connection, and recording his own guilt with each call, Connor continued. Nat completed her military command training, which included following procedures, maintaining communication records, and establishing a clear line of command. He is still unable to overcome that conditioning. Rex's tactical network carried her signal. Incoming dangers are indicated by 3 clicks. A few seconds later, Shadow confirmed. The private contractors were deploying with expert accuracy, with several teams coming in from various directions. According to Martinez, this isn't amateur work. They are elite operatives with a reputation for resolving political issues. They are also predictable. Nat answered, putting her counterplan into action already. Patterns are formed by military training. Vulnerabilities are caused by patterns. She observed the contractors setting up their assault positions through her sophisticated optics. They were ideal targets for what she had spent years creating, since everything adhered to flawless tactical doctrine. Omega of the Rex Shadow Ghost Protocol. She gave an order. Using their most sophisticated hunting techniques, the hounds stalked the streets of Oak Waters like living shadows. They were no longer merely military dogs. Apex predators, they were designed to disrupt professional military operations. As Martinez watched thermal imaging of the dogs' movements, Jesus breathed. They're not merely opposing the contractor's strategy. They're injuring them in areas where they can die. Nat stated that military operators use specialized signals to coordinate with her dogs and think in terms of tactical advantage. They fail to remember that certain creatures have evolved to hunt troops. The initial contractor crew was unaware of what had happened to them. Their advanced machinery kept breaking down. There was no communication. The tactical benefits vanished. Expert operators discovered that they were now prey rather than predators. Contact is reported by several teams. There was no real interaction, but Martinez interpreted over encrypted channels. They hear noises and see shadows and movement. According to Nat, psychological warfare forces them to doubt every sound, shadow, and seeming danger. Veterans of combat know the difference between being pursued and fighting. Phillips sounded increasingly desperate. Every team makes progress. Keep them from jeopardizing this operation. As federal teams started working on several sites at once, everything hinged on his transmission cutting out. Every level of political and military authority was being arrested as a result of the evidence trail Nat had helped uncover. They are attacking his Washington office. According to Connor, military police, federal agents, and congressional security were all moving simultaneously. The entire network is failing. Although the contractor teams made an effort to keep their tactics cohesive, their professional discipline was shattered by Rex and Shadow-specific hunting techniques. Elite operators discovered that they were alone and exposed. Their training is ineffective against predators that are designed to take advantage of it. You have no idea what you have done. Phillips made a last transmission, his voice crackling. The structures you've revealed, the systems you've compromised. I am well aware of what I have done. Patching into his frequency, Nat answered. Through her tactical show, I've reminded everyone that some things are more important than power, such as honoring our vows, defending our families, and serving with integrity. She observed Phillips's final, frantic countermoves being methodically dismantled. Hunters were interfering with the contractor team's missions while federal agents rounded them up. They didn't anticipate it. Martinez claimed that several arrests were ongoing while keeping an eye on contractor facilities, military installations, political offices, and federal channels. They're recording everything and protecting all parties. Every link, directive, and effort to conceal the entire scheme was revealed by Connor. Through specialist optics, Nat saw Phillips' power structure crumble as he was escorted out of his office in handcuffs. The very weapons he had assisted in creating brought down years of corruption, broken promises, and compromised values. Is it truly over? While federal teams secured many scenes, Martinez requested in a low voice. "This is it," Nat said, conducting last-minute equipment inspections on her dog's tactical gear. "The political ramifications, the trials, the probes. And that's only the beginning." Recognizing that their task was not yet complete, Rex and Shadow remained tactically focused. Other corrupt networks would be observing, picking up tips, and adjusting somewhere in the shadows. "They will try again," Connor said. "The same fundamental corruption, but with different people and approaches." "Good," Nat remarked quietly as she made one last check of her specialized equipment. "Because they are now aware of the particular thing that is pursuing them. And why, unless you're ready for war, you should never threaten a handler's family." Corruption at the highest echelons of political and military authority had been made clear by the night. More significantly, though, it had brought to everyone's attention why military dog handlers were regarded as the best hunters in contemporary combat. Not only had Nat Grant destroyed a criminal empire, but she had also demonstrated that some things were more powerful than military strength or political influence. Like a mother's love for her child, a handler's link with her dogs, and the commitment to uphold what really matters. She was more dangerous than any corrupt system could have imagined because of that. Like a purifying wave, dawn swept across Riverbend, erasing the darkness left by the previous night's activities. The intensity had lessened, but federal trucks continued to move purposefully through the streets. Hunting was no longer the focus. Rebuilding was the focus. Nat watched Rex and Shadow go about their morning routine in the training yard of her facility. The canines had returned to training routines after war missions with ease, but their vigilance had not faltered. Once you learned something, it stuck with you. Connor, carrying new coffee, informed that the final arrest total was coming in. 12 political figures, 37 military commanders, and more than 50 contractors. The entire network was made public. Looking up federal updates on her tablet, Martinez continued, "They're already calling it the biggest military corruption scandal in decades. Oversight committees are organizing and scheduling congressional hearings." Whitaker, too. Even though Nat already knew the answer, she asked. Connor confirmed that he was singing like a bird, exchanging information for considerations. Phillips as well. By exposing everyone else, they are both attempting to preserve themselves. As Nat saw her dogs at work, she noticed that they moved with the exact grace that had brought down a criminal empire. "What about the Shadow Reapers?" "Completely rolled up," Martinez said. "Coordinating with federal agencies, state police target their operations in 3 different states. King's testimony is especially noteworthy. It seems that they were merely the outward manifestation of a far more extensive distribution system. The dew on training gear that had been a part of their defensive preparations only days before was caught by the early sun. Once more, it was simply equipment while the following round of police dogs was trained in the fundamentals." As Maria's truck arrived, Emma's voice could be heard over the yard, "Mom." When Nat saw her baby, safe and whole, something that had been tight in her chest relaxed. "Is everything at the cabin quiet?" Emma gave her a hug as she asked. While unpacking goods, Maria responded, "Jake says his place is always open if we need it again. The next time, though, he would rather it wasn't due to a criminal empire." With their protective instincts permanently strengthened by the recent occurrences, Rex and Shadow took up positions on each side of Emma. The girl appeared unconcerned. She seemed more at ease with their combat-trained vigilance, if anything. Connor added softly, "The federal teams want to interview you. About the strategies you devised for hunting military targets and your unique training methods." "No," Nat said plainly as she observed Emma scratching behind Rex's ears. "Those remain under wraps. More individuals knowing how to transform military dogs into apex predators is the last thing we need." Martinez gave a sympathetic nod. "Even the good guys shouldn't share some weapons because they are too hazardous." Nat clarified, "Especially with the good guys. Authority corrupts." We proved that in just 2 days. She was still able to keep an eye on federal operations nationwide through her tactical feeds. Unbelievably, Phillips's network had penetrated every aspect of political supervision and military logistics. Connor said, "They're calling you a hero," indicating that her media attention was beginning to spread. The canine handler who revealed high-level corruption. Out of habit, Nat checked Rex and Shadow's equipment and said, "They're missing the point." The purpose of this was never to expose corruption. Family protection was the goal here. The rest was just a detail. Emma was assisting Maria with unpacking when she looked up. "Are they truly gone? All the evildoers?" Nat reassured her that these ones are, but her tactical awareness was still keen. "And everyone else who considers posing a threat to our family is aware of the current hunt." New updates appeared on Martinez's tablet. The goal of the Military Criminal Investigation Division is to examine every aspect of Whitaker's business. Every supply line, every link to criminal organizations, every transfer of weaponry. As Nat watched her dogs hold their defensive stances, she said, "Let them. This is something that the system must learn from. Recognize how pervasive corruption can be when no one is looking." Speaking of observing, Connor pointed to the black SUV that had drove up to the facility's entrance. It appears that the federal government is present for such interviews. 2 agents arrived politely, their body language deliberately non-threatening. It was obvious that they had received a briefing on how to approach someone who had methodically taken down top military operators. "We need to talk about your involvement in recent events, your unique training techniques, and your tactical advances," said Mrs. Grant, the chief agent. "No," Nat reiterated emphatically. "You have your conspirators, your evidence, and your arrests. That's sufficient. What you've created, ma'am, is a revolutionary capability, the ability to use canine teams to counter military activities." "That's right," she said, observing Rex and Shadow follow the agent about. "And it remains confidential. Certain weapons are too risky to distribute." Nat was distracted by something at the edge of her facility as the agents attempted to make their case. Shadow's posture changed slightly when he sensed something. "We have company," she remarked softly, interrupting the agent's pitch. She detected several approaching vehicles, not federal this time, through her tactical sensors. These were signed differently. Martinez confirmed that private contractors were looking at surveillance footage. It appears that some individuals have not learned their lesson and are still threatening dog handlers. As Nat examined her specialist equipment, a chilly smile appeared on her face. "So I suppose that class hasn't been dismissed yet." As she started to get ready, the agents looked on with interest. They had come to see how she had transformed military canines into the best hunters in the world and to learn her techniques. Rather, they were going to see it for themselves. Because someone had determined that Nat Grant's tactics were too risky to be left in private hands, somewhere in the shadows of power. They were going to discover why it was a mistake that went beyond tactical blunders to jeopardize a handler's family. Rex and Shadow moved to alert positions, their tactical gear caught in the morning glare. They were no longer merely military dogs. Designed to hunt troops, they were apex predators. And the start of class was imminent. There was never a hope for the private contractors. They had professional training, advanced equipment, and well-thought-out tactical plans. However, they committed the same error as all those who had put Nat Grant's family in danger. Instead of a hunter, they believed they were dealing with a military operator. Like living shadows, Rex and Shadow navigated the dawn mist by following procedures that had destroyed elite military units. The contractors discovered that their cars were inoperable, their communications were compromised, and their tactical advantages had been removed in a matter of minutes. Martinez said that 4 teams were keeping an eye on the issue via secret communications. Top-tier operatives, all former special forces. This cost someone a lot of money. Nat responded, and wasted every penny, as she observed her canines methodically isolate and neutralize the threat through specialized optics. They are predictable due to their military training. They are susceptible because they are predictable. Instead, the federal investigators who had come for interviews witnessed a master lecture on why military dog handlers were regarded as the greatest predators in contemporary warfare. One agent gasped while viewing the engagement's thermal imaging, "My God. They're not merely rendering them inoperable. They are being pursued. As if they had developed especially to thwart military activities." Nat admitted using quiet signals to coordinate with her pets because they have. Hunting insurgent commanders through battle zones throughout 3 missions in Afghanistan. We discovered how troops move, think, and respond to stress. The noises of experienced operators learning what it like to become prey filled the morning air. Elite warriors were confined, their training meaningless against predators designed to take advantage of it. Connor reported from his tactical position that the last team was attempting to withdraw, requesting an extraction. Nat interrupted him. "They're trying to get us to concentrate on the initial attack by requesting support and sending a second wave in." Just as expected, more cars pulled up outside the building. Using the knowledge gained from the first team's failure, these operators moved even more precisely. As Martinez tracked the new threats, he noticed that someone truly wanted your methods. They're not merely contractors. They are experts in black operations, the type that governments employ when they need issues to vanish. As Nat examined her specialist equipment, a chilly smile appeared on her face. "Now, let's show them why some guns are simply too deadly to distribute." The ensuing 10 minutes turned into a sophisticated canine warfare tactical workshop. With chilling efficiency, Rex and Shadow dismantled professional military operatives as they walked across the facility's grounds like apex predators. Martinez interpreted intercepted messages from many compromised teams. They are significantly more exposed since they are attempting to coordinate and establish tactical control. Nat concluded, observing her canines as they expertly circumvent military procedures. They are simpler to hunt the more they attempt to apply mainstream doctrine. As elite operatives were often reduced to isolated, bewildered prey, the federal agents observed with increasing empathy. This was evolution in action, not merely tactical superiority. "Now you understand," Nat whispered to them, "why these techniques remain confidential, why certain capabilities are too risky to divulge." She kept an eye on the engagement's closing stages via her tactical network. The contractors were ensnared in a predator's web, their expert knowledge and advanced equipment worthless against hunters designed to evade it. Through their captured frequencies, she ordered them to stand down, or else the next demonstration will become less tactful. The operators complied because they were competent enough to identify an unwinnable position. Out of habit, Nat knelt next to her dogs, examining them for injuries as federal officers started to secure the scene. As Connor watched tactical teams process the contractors, he warned that they would attempt again. The same fundamental objective, but different players and approaches. "Let them," said Nat, doing last-minute equipment checks. Every attempt just serves to highlight the need for certain capabilities to remain confidential and the dangers of sharing some weapons. Emma, no longer afraid of conflict, watched from the porch of the institution. She knew the difference between guardians and threats because she had witnessed what kept her safe. "Is this time truly over?" Nat came over and she asked. Nat stated that anyone else considering trouble knows exactly what's hunting them now as they watch federal teams handle the remaining contractors. New updates appeared on Martinez's tablet. The Pentagon is interested in creating standardized training procedures, and military intelligence is asking for a thorough briefing on your procedures. "No," Nat responded firmly as she observed Rex and Shadow continuing to stand guard. "Certain things must remain private, such as family members defending one another." The training yard of the facility was once again used for teaching dogs basic skills rather than hunting soldiers as the morning sun rose completely over Riverbend. However, an irreversible transformation had occurred. After learning a crucial lesson about why certain skills were too risky to become common practice, the federal agents left with their detainees. Carrying warnings to anyone who might pursue similar operations, the contractors vanished into federal custody. As the final cars pulled away, Connor said, "Back to normal." Nat checked her dog's equipment one last time and fixed it to the new normal. One in which everyone is aware of the consequences of endangering a handler's family. She was still able to keep tactical awareness of possible threats and monitor the perimeter thanks to her unique sensors. Once formed, certain behaviors never go away. Once taught, some lessons remain taught. Martinez cautioned that the system will adjust. Develop countermeasures and innovative techniques. As Nat watched Emma assist Maria in getting ready for the day's usual training sessions, she said, "Good. Because predators continue to evolve, and so will we." With their protective instincts permanently strengthened by the recent events, Rex and Shadow took up positions on each side of the facility. They had evolved into apex predators designed to hunt soldiers, not just military dogs. They would also make sure Nat Grant's legacy was remembered. Some weapons were too risky to distribute. Some skills are necessary to maintain privacy. Furthermore, you only made the error of threatening a handler's family once. Because it wasn't about tactical superiority or military might in the end. It has to do with something more basic and primordial. A family standing up for what was important, a handler trusting their dogs, a mother protecting her child. They were therefore far more dangerous than any system of weapons could ever be. Soon the morning classes would start. In the same yard where expert military operators had been methodically sought, regular police canines were being trained in basic tasks. Life would go on. Things would return to normal. But in Riverbend, something had changed. Something had changed. And anyone who may think of endangering Nat Grant's family would recall why military dog handlers were the most dreaded predators in contemporary combat, somewhere in the shadows of power. Because certain lessons that were taught once remained taught forever. The remaining remnants of the morning mist were burned away as the sun rose higher. Nat watched as Rex and Shadow patrolled their area, using talents learned in conflict zones and refined in civilian life to protect their family. Their legacy was this. As guardians to be revered, not as weapons to be shared. As family defending family, not as military assets. They were therefore more potent than any tactical doctrine could account for. On your screen, videos are ready for you. You won't want to miss these if you like this one. Simply click to view, and remember to subscribe. A lot would be at stake.
Disclaimer. This channel stands against all forms of intolerance, discrimination, racism, and violations of human rights. The stories shared here are original creations, developed to encourage reflection, understanding, and constructive dialogue. All content is produced with a commitment to respecting diversity and honoring human dignity.